Okay, so has happened in the world of sport in the last couple of days. A whole host of Man City players are currently self-isolating. There are reports that Mendy has breached COVID protocols again. That means I think six Man City players are unavailable for today's match against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. Interesting, to say the least. Then you also have the fact that Burnley Fulham has been called off. Yet another Premier League game has fallen afoul of the COVID pandemic. And then you look at the lower leagues from the Championship down to League Two yesterday. Whole host of matches postponed, which raises the question: will English football have to suspend play again, like they did back in March, even for a short stopgap? Can these games be replayed at any time? So that's some interesting questions. The NHL will begin in 10 days. Their return to play protocols have been met. Some arenas may have fans in attendance. We'll be interested to see how the NHL plays out with the divisional realignments and the shortened schedule. Will be really interesting there. Obviously, the European transfer window for football has opened. Not a lot of movement as of yet in the European transfer market. It will be interesting to see if players signed from overseas have to quarantine for a set period before they're allowed to represent their new teams. That'll be interesting to see, and it'll be interesting to see how much money ultimately is spent in the transfer window, and a whole host of other things, really. Otherwise, it's been quite a quiet news day, all told. The fact that the coronavirus pandemic and the effect on football, I think, is the most interesting talking point as things currently stand. That's interesting. The NFL has said with renewed testing, their final round 16 matches will all go ahead. So every single match will go ahead today as planned at the end of the regular season, considering that a lot of players have tested positive and whole squads have had to isolate players and rearrange where they play. But the NFL has said every single game has got played. Every single game should go ahead as planned. And that is an interesting subplot, considering the amount of positive tests and the amount of squad disruption NFL franchises have had this season, that the NFL has managed to get all regular season games just go ahead, really. That's something that is stunning. So the NFL has said, yep, all games are going to go ahead and we'll complete the regular season. They still plan to have the Super Bowl with fans in attendance, max capacity. That was what the NFL were planning, is to have full attendance at the Super Bowl in little over a month's time. That is going to be interesting to see if that is achievable. So we'll keep our eye on the Super Bowl and whether fans are going to be there, because that is their showpiece event that makes them the most money. Interesting one. The NHL obviously has had to go through these protocols. The World Juniors have had to be played in a bubble in Edmonton. And when they put this to players, bubble situation again, players rejected that. They said no. So hence why the divisional realignments. They've obviously had a delayed start to the season. They're going to have a reduced schedule. Going to be very interesting to see how that all plays out in the coming days. That's a very interesting kind of talking point. Let's just have a quick look. So I think Leicester City have beaten Newcastle 2-1 at St James's Park. That is interesting if they have. Let's have a look at the results. Yeah, Leicester have beaten Newcastle to go third. Bournemouth have condemned racist abuse directed at Stanislas online. So again, there's more issues with the use of Twitter. Bournemouth have condemned disgusting and completely intolerable racist abuse directed at midfielder Junior Stanislas after the Cherries Championship win in Stoke City. The club said he was targeted by one person on Twitter on Saturday. The person sent multiple tweets of racial abuse alongside vile insults about the midfielder's family. There is a growing call for social media companies to verify accounts. So Twitter has been in the headlines quite a bit in the last few days. What else have we got? Man City and Chelsea has kicked off for them. As I say, Man City are short benched, and they're without 6 key first team regulars who are not available. Their starting lineup is not what I would call top flight. They've got Stefan in goal, Cancelo, Stones, Ruben Dias, and Zinchenko as the back four, Gundogan and Rodri in midfield, Sterling, De Bruyne and Foden as the attacking midfielders, and Bernardo Silva up front. Well, I think Man City will finish in the league. Well, if they keep having these COVID out breaches, and this is where I think the question of the protocols that are put in place to allow football to resume playing. It seems it's down to club protocols. It seems. I think there's a basic minimum protocols in place. I think they have got games in hand because they've had games postponed. So that could become interesting. Very, very similar to the top of the league where Manchester United have had games in hand and taken advantage of that. Liverpool have now got a game in hand over Leicester as well. I don't know where they're going to finish. I can't. As things currently stand, it's very congested. At the top half of the table, if I quickly look at the table, it will give us a better idea. Bear in mind, we've got the FA Cup and League Cups to play out as well, and European football. This is where I think we may have an issue with completing seasons and rearranging these postponed fixtures that we've had, not just in the Premier League, but across the leagues, because the lower leagues have been decimated. It will be very, very interesting to see. Let's have a look at the table quickly. Tottenham... Newcastle 1, Leicester 2. That's a final score. So at the moment, Liverpool are top with 33 points after playing 16 games. Man United second, 33 points after playing 16 games. Leicester third, 32 points after playing 17. So that's interesting. Tottenham 29 points after playing 16. Everton 29 points after playing 16. And Chelsea and Man City are both on 27. Man City have got 2 games in hand. And then you've got Villa, Southampton, and West Ham all on 26. And Villa have got 2 games in hand. Southampton have got a game in hand. And then there's games in hand for a variety of clubs in the Premier League. I don't know where they're going to finish, but I think you have to look at the fact that there's going to have to be some fixtures rearranged. And we could see more match postponements. If Fulham Burnley's anything to go by, and it appears a whole host of Premier League clubs have had players breach the protocols that are in place, including the government restrictions outside of football, which the general public have to abide by, of the Tier 3 and Tier 4 restrictions in place. It is going to be interesting. With the FA Cup third round due to take place, I think, in a week or so's time, that is going to be highly interesting to see if they can actually rearrange these postponed fixtures. And if you look at the lower leagues, if you go on any sports website that has the leagues and the tables and the fixtures, you have to look at it. I mean, my neighbour, he's a Stockport County fan. He's part of the Stockport County fan forum. One of the members of the fan forum is trying to work out points per game. We could see that actually happen. I don't think the FA have allowed enough flexibility when they discussed with the Premier League and the Football League about return to play protocols back in the summer when they finished off last season and resumed this season about giving enough flexibility. I'm not certain we could complete the full season package. I honestly believe that. I think we could see more games postponed, and then there could be a fixture backlog to complete. Where Man City will finish, it'll be very interesting on today's result. They are playing Chelsea. They're both equal on points. Man City have games in hand. They've just kicked off as of about 9 minutes ago, but they are short benched. Their bench has got 1 less player than Chelsea's. Chelsea can name a full squad. Man City have 6 first-team regulars self-isolating. We know that Kyle Walker, Gabriel Jesus, and Benjamin and others are not available. We know that Mendy is now being found to have breached COVID protocols and rules set by the club and the government. We know Fulham have got the same problem. Their match today was postponed. It's going to be very interesting to see how these fixtures get rearranged with the FA Cup round the corner, with the 2 League Cup semi-finals round the corner, with the Champions League and Europa League knockout stages about to commence. It's going to be very interesting to see not only how English football, but I think football across Europe completes the seasons, because you could have Man City play in Europe. Yes, the players get regularly tested. You do get false negatives and false positives in this testing, and we know, yes, obviously the vaccine programs are starting to be rolled out, but it'd be very interesting to see where they finish. I think they are a step below the teams above them. I think the teams above them in the league have a bit more. I think Everton and Southampton, for example, are dark horses to upset the apple cart. Man United have, for all the issues with their style of play and how they're winning and how they're playing, they're rightly in the top two. They've won the most games. Ironically, Liverpool have actually won less games. So it's very interesting to see how it all plans out. But I think Man City may actually miss the European places. That could be an actual thing that happens. Uh, but I think it's still too early to tell. I think we'll have to try and get through the rest of this festive period, get through into the end of the transfer window. I think will be a good barometer to see where teams are at, considering we've obviously had a late start to the season and no winter break. When we enter February, that will give us a better opportunity to say this team is most likely going to finish in the top four, the top five. They could have a decent run of form, but at the same time, the gap between the top three clubs and the rest is growing. I can't see Man City making the top three as things currently stand. They would need a massive drop off in form from Leicester, Man United, and Liverpool to get back into the mix for the title. We'd need Southampton and Everton to also have a massive dip in form as well, which doesn't look likely with the way they're playing. So I can't see them making the top five, personally. But a lot can change in a month. I mean, in a month's time, we could have multiple games postponed, massive COVID outbreaks. We could have losses of form, injury. FA Cup runs may distract teams, and so much can happen in a week, let alone a month. But on paper, looking at it, they don't look as strong as they were a couple of seasons ago. I think the group of players has peaked under Guardiola, and we may see things fizzle out. I think Man City need to have a refresh. They may need a new name in, behind the bench. They may need a new manager to freshen things up. Their reliance on overseas players as well, I think, is coming home to bite them a little bit. You can see that other clubs above them in the league have more homegrown talent in their squads. That's something else to note. I mean, yes, Foden is starting today, but there's not a lot of youth players coming through the system that are of a high enough level at Man City to make the first team. It's plainly obvious they are heavily reliant on players brought in from other clubs. You could argue Mahrez, for example, coming in from Leicester, hasn't really had the impact that you would expect. John Stones, yes, he's starting today, but he hasn't really had the impact when he came over from Everton. So it's going to be interesting. Is that dressing room pretty happy? Is that a happy dressing room? I think with all the negative stories coming out of Man City over this calendar year, with players misbehaving and COVID breaches, and it seems to me the culture in that dressing room isn't necessarily the most positive culture in the league. I think other dressing rooms seem to have more unity and a more positive outlook and better disciplined as well. And that in itself is highly interesting. But where do I think they finish? That's an open-ended question, because I think we haven't got through the transfer window yet. So we have to get that out of the way. You could add a couple of players to that dressing room. You could completely change a team's fortunes. For example, I mean, Liverpool have got a lot of injuries. I mean, most of their key defensive players are out at some point this season. They're missing several key players. They're still top. So it'll be interesting to see if Liverpool can do a back-to-back. If Man City can climb back into the top 4 or 5, I don't see it right now. Not with things playing out. And Chelsea as well have been disappointing this season. They've sort of stagnated under Frank Lampard, and there are growing calls from some in the Chelsea fan base online that Lampard should go. I think the problem that a lot of these clubs have had is they've not had managerial stability. And if you notice, let's have a look at the top 5. Now, I think Jurgen Klopp and Guardiola are the two longest serving managers in the top half of the table. Very interesting. Let's have a look at the table quickly. Let's have a look at the table. So Liverpool, obviously, Klopp's been there for quite some time. Man United, Solskjaer, he's had his first full season last year. He's in technically his third season, with his second full season. Leicester, Brendan Rodgers, he's now been there a couple of seasons. Tottenham, managerial change last year, beginning of the season. Mourinho replacing Pochettino. Everton, Ancelotti, I think, came in last year. Chelsea, I think this is Lampard's second or third season now. Man City, Guardiola has been there for quite some time. It is interesting. Southampton, who are floating around, being a dark horse. Hussein Hartel's been there, I think, 18 months now, signed a contract extension. They're planning to lock him up long term. But there isn't really a long-term manager. I think Klopp and Guardiola are the two longest-serving managers now in the Premier League. So there's a lot of managerial changes in recent time. But I think Man City, I don't know. I don't know where they finish. The London clubs aren't doing very well at all. That is proven by the table. I mean, let's have a look where the London clubs are in the Premier League. Let's have a look. Because it is interesting reading. It is very interesting reading where the clubs are at. That I can totally agree with. Table. So Tottenham are fourth with 29 points, and they look like there's a gap appearing between Tottenham and the top three. I think the top three are going to be the top three going forward. Tottenham are fourth, Chelsea are sixth, West Ham are 10th, Arsenal 11th, Palace 14th, and Fulham 18th. Yeah, it's the London clubs aren't doing as well this season. That is obvious and quite clear. Let's have a look at the Championship, because the Championship is also interesting how that's all playing out. So, wow, that's really good turnaround. Norwich are starting to pull away in the Championship. They're top. Swansea second, Bournemouth, Brentford, Reading, and Watford. So no London clubs. Brentford, you could argue, is a London club. They're fourth. And then, yeah, Millwall are 17th, QPR are 20th. Yeah, so the London clubs aren't having a great season. Quite frankly. Could you argue it's down to COVID? I don't know. But there seems to be a power shift in football, and it will be very interesting as where you ask where Man City will finish. If they can get a win at Chelsea today, that does change things. But there's still that gap there between the top three that is now starting to become reality with Leicester winning today to the rest of the league. I'm not sure. I mean, Tottenham had that brief spell at the top of the table, and then they fell away very, very quickly. They had a couple of bad results. Is Mourinho the right guy for Tottenham? That's a question. I mean, Pochettino is obviously now committed to be PSG manager. He's announced as PSG's new manager. Was Pochettino the right guy to be at Tottenham? They were the nearly men under Pochettino. They didn't quite get over that hump. Tottenham have to get over that. I have to win some kind of silverware with this playing. I keep saying this every season. Tottenham have to win silverware with this playing group, and we're seeing that playing group players come and go. The core is not really, I don't think, as effective as the other teams around them. Playing simple. Man City, have they run their race with Guardiola as manager? That's the question. They still can't win the Champions League with all the money they've spent. And you look at that. I looked at that starting lineup, and one player from the academy. I think two academy players on the bench. That's with all the money they've spent on that youth academy. That's not a good return either. It'll be interesting to see if let's say Man City lose today. Yes, they've got a shortened bench. They are missing 6 first-team regulars. What happens going forward? Will Man City be active in the transfer window? Who's going to be the most active club in the transfer window? We know there's a few rumours floating around of some clubs interested in certain players, and what's going to happen? That's something else to consider. As far, I mean, there's been no major signings as of yet in the transfer window. I would have thought if you're going to sign a player and he's playing overseas, there is a quarantine period. You would want to sign him early on, have him quarantined for a couple of weeks, 10 days, 14 days, get him into the side before the end of January. But whether deadline day is going to be hectic or not, we will see. Will the club spend as much money as they normally do? Will it be a suppressed transfer window? It's all upended, isn't it? Kieran Trippier, this is an interesting one, has had his 10-week ban and his £70,000 fine for his betting breaches suspended while under appeal. So Kieran Trippier missed Atletico's win over Getafe the other day. He was handed this suspension from his time actually when he was at Tottenham. When he was at Tottenham, he was charged with betting breaches back in the summer of 2019 before his move to Atletico Madrid. In this summer just gone, he was very, under investigation. The charges relate to a period of time when he was at Tottenham. He was hit with a 10-week ban and a £70,000 fine. Now, I've been following this story from the beginning, and it is highly interesting that, the ban is now suspended while under appeal. Atletico Madrid and Diego Simeone said, we will support the player throughout this period of time, which is the club's duty to support their employee, absolutely. He was found guilty on, I think, 4 of the charges levelled against him. It was repeat infringements of the betting rules. It will be interesting to see what comes out of the appeals process. Very similar to Sturridge and his betting breaches as well. It does raise questions about the role of betting companies within sport as sponsors. It raises a lot of questions. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with Kieran Trippier. I mean, the headline states that there is an appeals process and that the ban has been suspended, so he could, in theory, return to play during this appeal process. But let's have a little read of Kieran Trippier's little naughtiness, because he has been a naughty boy. Now, from what I remember, he was charged by the FA not long after his transfer to Atletico Madrid. So he'd already gone to Atletico Madrid when he was charged. So it is interesting that. Here we go. Right, so England and Atletico Madrid right back Kieran Trippier has had his 10-week ban for breaching betting rules suspended pending an appeal, which is totally fair. A Football Association panel found in December, so last month, the 30-year-old had committed 4 breaches of a betting rule. He was given an immediate worldwide football ban and fined £70,000. But this has now been put on hold. FIFA said the postponement was due to the request for provisional measures lodged by Atletico Madrid, and they did say they would support him throughout this process. The offences occurred in July 2019, which is when Trippier joined Atletico from Tottenham Hotspur. He missed the win over Getafe on Wednesday. Following the appeal and specifically the request for provisional measures lodged by the club, Atletico Madrid, the FIFA Appeal Committee has approved to stay the extension of the suspension until the procedure is over for the committee. It is interesting that it's taken a year and a half to get to this point. I think he was charged on 10 counts of betting breaches initially. He's been found guilty on 4. I think it's very similar to the Daniel Sturridge betting case, where he was also given a suspension. Yes, I feel discipline of a lot of players is a problem. It's not just related. It's not unique to association football or soccer. If you're watching this podcast overseas, it's not a unique thing just to football. We've seen it in the NFL. We've seen it in Major League Baseball, the NRL in Australia. We've seen it in rugby union with Danny Cipriani as a prime example of a player with lots of off-field indiscretions, and Curtly Beale in Australia. It's not unique to football. It's not unique to our most popular sport in this country. It isn't. There are certain sports that seem to have regular issues with player discipline, and players not only breaching actual league rules, but actually getting up to some severe criminality outside of sport. There needs to be discussions on codes of conduct and what is expected of when you're a professional athlete. I think in the modern day of social media, it is harder to get away with things than 10, 20, 30 years ago. I've got a very funny book written by Phil Tufnell in relation to the Ashes. And some of his tales when he was on Ashes tours in the 90s are hilarious, but at the same time, if you are a coach, if you are an administrator in that sport, and you've got a player doing these things, you'll be like, oh God, let's hope this doesn't get into the press. Now it's, oh God, let's hope this doesn't end up on social media. Look at the Ben Stokes situation with Alex Hales a couple of years ago outside that nightclub in Bristol, for example. The damage that did to the reputation of Ben Stokes and Alex Hales. Ben Stokes has sort of won back some respect from fans. Not all fans are a big fan of Ben Stokes. Alex Hales, his career is completely derailed. I look at the NRL and what happened during the 8-week lockdown that Rugby League in Australia had. A whole host of players breached the COVID protocols. And I followed all the way from the start of the season in March to the pause after round 2, the 8 weeks of the pause to the resumption of play on the 28th of May. In that 8-week period, there were players persistently breaching the protocols that the NRL had agreed with the New South Wales and Queensland state governments in order to get the game back on and playing. They also breached federal Australian, similar to what Mendy and Carl Walker and Gabriel Jesus and Mitrovic and Mihailovic or Mitrolovic from whatever Palace or whatever have breached here. There seems to be an issue with off-field discipline with players. It is plain and simple. Other sports seem to have less negative headlines, although these incidents still happen. We see them in a variety of sports. Um, Rugby league is one of those sports that has a problem, especially in the NRL. We've seen it also with the Super League over here with the Tompkins brothers in that pub in Wigan, and then the footage that appeared a year and a half ago of them in a pub in Wigan, basically harassing a member of staff, being abusive to a member of staff. They were asked to leave politely, they didn't. They got abusive, they got threatening, and their careers have derailed as well. But there seems to be certain sports that have repetitive offenders as well. I'm not a fan of Stokes. I've been off cricket for a few years now, but I would like to watch the India series in summer if I had Sky Sports, but I don't, so I won't. Again, I've gone off cricket somewhat. We will obviously have the 100 on free-to-air TV, which, to be honest, is not the solution to cricket's problems. Ben Stokes is a divisive character. Absolutely. Is he a great player? Yes. Is he also known to have massive bouts of ill discipline? Yes. You look at his disciplinary record, he is a divisive figure. It doesn't help that he's one of the biggest names in the sport right now, that most people will know who he is. That is a problem when you're your flagship player, he's one of your best players, and he's had some personal issues with his father passing away, which is sad. He's had some personal issues of a family nature, and that is unfortunate. But at the same time, some of his antics off the field and on social media haven't covered himself of the sport in any glory, and actually damages the image of the sport. It is great that we have a 5-test series against India, although Indian players in their squad are having to isolate because they've been in a COVID hotspot in Melbourne. So again, the biosecurity protocols have been questioned. We've had the South African tour finished early due to COVID. So cricket is one of those sports that is heavily impacted by the coronavirus. Do I play video games? Yes, I do. I haven't played for a while, not since I've been in the new flat. I don't play as much as I used to, and I'm waiting for the prices of the new Xbox and the new PlayStation to drop this summer before I really purchase anything. And there's no real video games right now that I'm a big fan of. Flintoff had issues, but he was likable. I would say Freddie Flintoff, I think, has a decent personality where he's not hasn't got a nasty streak in him, but he had his issues with alcohol, and he's been very, very open and candid about his issues with alcohol. The Pedalo incident, while we can see that as funny, that was actually quite a serious incident. The difference between Flintoff and Stokes is Flintoff wasn't going out there getting in fights, racially and abusing people online, abusing the disabled online, such as Ben Stokes with certain incidents over the years. Freddie Flintoff was just a lovable bit of a pisshead. However, on the surface, he just seems like he likes to drink. He did have some depression issues. He did have an issue with alcohol. He was on the verge of being an alcoholic. It did affect his injury recovery. It affected his weight. Same thing with other players at that time. There was a culture of heavy drinking. There were some issues with mental health issues within that squad. The team didn't perform very well after the 2005 Ashes. There was a period of time where the team wasn't very good. There was issues within the dressing room. And yeah, Freddie Flintoff is a very likable character. Absolutely. I've met him. He still, unfortunately, has that iffy relationship with alcohol now. I think Ben Stokes is a very unpredictable character. And yeah, he is abrasive. It's the same with Kevin Peterson as well. He was a very divisive character. You get these divisive characters in sport who are very big egos, very big personalities. But Kevin Peterson was just difficult to deal with in the dressing room. He was a disruptive dressing room influence. He wasn't a nasty person. He had his point of view. He had a differing point of view in South Africa, which is why he came over to England to play his club cricket. He was an interesting character in the dressing room in the sense that he knew he was one of the best players that we had. At the same time, he was a divisive character because of some of his attitudes to, team selection, playing, he captaincy. Flintoff as well. Flintoff, it seems, was very well liked by his teammates. For all his flaws, he was simply very well liked by his teammates. Stokes, I don't know. Because cricket has lost a bit of popularity, partly being behind a paywall all the time, which I don't think has helped. I think yes, we get the 100 on free to air, but no one wants that apart from the ECB, and it's going to cost them a lot of money. And if we are still under these restrictions come the start of the 100, they're going to take a massive financial hit. They've already admitted it's going to make a loss for 2 years. They've delayed the start of it, and fans haven't warmed to it. So I don't know what what's going to happen for cricket going forward. But when you have negative headlines appearing, and I think the mainstream media has a part to play in this. They do. But if you listen to some of the, I think cricket is a sport that does have an issue with alcohol. It does have an issue with players misbehaving, and it's an ongoing thing with cricket. When you look at rugby union, Cipriani, I mean, crikey, he's a very divisive character. He ended his contract at Gloucester early, which is a shame. He has a love-hate relationship with the sport. I felt he should have gone to the World Cup in 2019. I think having that extra option at 10 or at fullback or at inside centre who can give something different could have helped England. But his off-field antics damaged his on-field career. There is no doubt on that. I mean, every club he's been to, he's had off-field indiscretions that have affected, his ability to play, and also he's had, drink driving convictions and alcohol has been a problem for Cipriani, and his personal life. He's had a very colourful personal life, and that has affected him. Long term, he could be the next Paul Gascoigne just in rugby union. Cipriani is one of those characters where he's undoubtedly skillful, but at the same time, he's very unpredictable off the field, and his off-field antics hurt him. Cricket relies a lot on just a few individual famous players. It relies on some influential players to sell the game. If you actually watch the IPL, everyone there's a star player. If you watch the county game, it's very entertaining. There's some very underrated players, because the county game doesn't get the press coverage it should, and the coverage in the media that it should on free-to-air TV would be great. You don't get to see the county game for what it is, which is a brilliant format. You don't get to see the T20s and the one-day format, which is a brilliant format. There are some really talented players and some really good teams and some really interesting dynamics, because the media is obsessed with the test team. The media is forcing this 100 format, which no one wants. There is an agenda. And the mainstream media, and this is where you can have a go at Sky B for getting the rights, and you can really have a go at the ECB for just seeing the checks coming in, seeing the money and taking the short-term financial boost, but not for long-term health of the sport. We've been here before with TV rights discussions. People want to have their media more accessible. This is why I've got the NRL subscription on the NRL website. If I was to have a Sky Sports package, I wouldn't be able to watch every single game. Because I've got the NRL package, I can watch any single game whenever I want. I've been rewatching games from this last season in the last couple of days just to fill the time until the new season starts in March. I've been watching podcasts from last season to do with the NRL on the NRL website. It costs me a lot less to get more media. I'm happier with having the NRL subscription. I'm going to get the AFL subscription as well in March when that season starts, because it's more cost effective, and I get to watch more games. I get to watch more content for less money, and that's the debate about the media rights for sport. Amazon now getting in on the act, although Amazon's package is crap. No one wants to watch the Amazon games, but now you've got websites that were set up to sell books. Amazon was a book selling website 20 years ago. You bought books on Amazon. Now you can get anything on Amazon. It's become an online retailer. It now wants to get into the media game. Whether you agree with Amazon Prime, or you agree with Disney Plus, or you agree with all these streaming services, which ironically people want to get them all, because that series is on this one. This sport is now being shown on this streaming service. It costs more than regular cable or satellite. Ridiculous. But the modern generation want to have the internet as their source of information, when actually TV is still there. The county players are not really known outside the county. Yeah, this is a problem unless you are a hardcore cricket fan and you follow cricket religiously, other than the Test side, the one-day side, the IPL, and a few of the big name tournaments. Unless you are actually following domestic cricket and you are a religious cricket fan, yeah, that's the problem. It's the coverage that the domestic game, not just here, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, these West Indies, unless you are really intensely a hardcore fan who will just read up on all the cricket players coming through the various nations and the various cricket boards, you won't know. And again, part of that is to do with the mainstream media and their reporting and the sports reports. It's the same with ice hockey in this country. The mainstream media's coverage of it is a joke. absolute joke. And you go on the main Sky Sports and BBC Sport websites, and you type in ice hockey, and their reporting is piss poor. They can't even. Whoever's reporting on it doesn't fully understand the sport. This is the problem. There isn't the coverage there, and the fans want that, and the sport needs that. I think motorsport, it's F1 and Formula E are getting all the coverage when you've got brilliant motors like touring cars, NASCAR. You've got rallying, which I think is the best form of motorsport there is, because that is man machine versus nature, and nature tends to win. And if you make a slight mistake on a rally stage, you're done. You don't get a nice little runoff. You are going into the trees. You're going into a brick wall. You've broken the car. You've rolled the car. I love rallying. British international ice hockey players. I know most of them. Again, I'm more of a hardcore ice hockey fan, so I know a lot of the players. I do follow a lot of the leagues. The World Championships you can watch on YouTube. There is, I think, Premier Sports and Free Sports will be showing the World Championships when they come around. I don't think they're unknown to most people. The viewership is rising for ice hockey in this country. I don't know what the viewing figures are like to compare to NFL, but yeah, there is a fan base here. The fact we're in the top tier of the World Championship is helping the profile of the game. The quality level of play that we've seen in the last decade has massively improved. The fact we now got players like Liam Cup getting drafted has made news across the Atlantic in North America, which is a big thing. That's the main market for the sport outside of Europe. It's one of the big leagues over there. When you've got the Canadian and the US media outlets picking up on this thing, I wouldn't say they're unknown to most people. Ice hockey is a niche sport outside the Northern Hemisphere. Europe is the second most popular sport. So in Europe, the European ice hockey media know about the British players because a lot of the British players have been forced to play in Europe, the European Swedish League and the German League and the Finnish League this season. So British players are coming over to Europe to play, and the Swiss League and all that. The ice hockey media in Europe is very well educated. There's a lot of European-based players who obviously do play in the US and Canada, in the NHL, the AHL, and the ECHL. There's a lot of European players who go over to North America, even to university to play. I wouldn't say they're unknown, but the profile is growing. But at the same time, in this country, the main broadcasters, Sky, BBC, and BT, don't give a toss, and that is the problem. The fan base is there; it's untapped, and there's the casual fan who, if you were to show them a game, could watch. It is there. The problem is the obsession with football, the obsession, I think, with a sport that has, as you say, has so many negativities. With these players off the field having problems, it does seem that there is an issue. And you look at since March the amount of players, and it's a handful of clubs that seem to have the regular issues. Man City is a club that has a whole host of players basically breaching the protocols that are in place, and it has to raise questions of the protocols that the FA have agreed with the Premier League and the Football League to get games resumed. They would also have discussions with government. It does raise questions about the protocols and the biosecurity measures in place. I don't know I know you're not a basketball fan, but the NBA viewership is in decline in EuroLeague basketball. Basketball is actually very popular but especially the Mediterranean and Eastern European countries in Europe. That I do know. And that was partly to do with the Olympic programs that these nations had during the Cold War. The Soviets had a very, and then the communist Eastern Bloc states had a very big basketball program. The Balkans, they love basketball. The Serbians and Croats have had many good players. Bosnians have played in the NBA. There is a love for the game in especially the Balkan areas of Europe. They do like the game. There are a lot of Eastern Europeans who've gone over to the NBA. I think the NBA does have some issues. However, it's one of the few leagues in North America which does have labour peace. What is interesting is Gary Bettman, everyone's favourite commissioner. I think Gary Bettman's one of the more competent major league commissioners in North America. He initially worked for the NBA in the 80s. He's the guy who was tasked by the league to come up with the salary cap system. The salary cap system that he put in place back in, I think it was 88, is still in place. The financial arrangements Gary Bettman created in the 80s are still in place in the NBA today. They've had no issues with labour unrest since then. when it comes to players' pay, escrow, deferring of salaries, the salary cap, how it goes up and down. The NBA has achieved player and league unity where other leagues, such as the NHL, has had 3 lockouts and a strike. Major League Baseball, I've done the history of Major League Baseball and its list of strikes and player disputes. It still doesn't have a salary cap. The NFL, there's been some issues with player unrest as well. Now you've got Major League Soccer and Major League Rugby now as the emerging sports with expanding leagues in the US and Canada. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with the NBA because they take place at the same time as the NHL. Now they've already started their season, which is crucial. Very interesting to note that the NBA is already 2-3 weeks ahead of the NHL in resumption of play. Interesting thing is NBA squads are smaller than NHL squads. They have less players on their roster. The NHL has more pieces in play. They share the same arenas, but they have more pieces in play. They have more players, more coaches, more backroom staff. There's the taxi squad issue. The NHL doesn't have a universal TV deal in the US, doesn't have a great TV package in the US in comparison. That's why it's not as wealthy. Lower salary cap. The NBA has an opportunity, does have a massive opportunity in getting more viewership this season. At the same time, the NHL is concerned that it could lose market share in the US if it didn't have a season. Now, it's interesting. But basketball in Europe is actually very, very popular, especially in the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe. Predominantly the Balkans is exceptionally popular. There are a lot of good basketball players who have played in the NBA who've come from Eastern Europe, especially the Balkans. That is not an unknown thing. And basketball, a lot of sports are very popular in Europe that you wouldn't think of. A lot of sports. It's just interesting how in Northern Europe, the club dynamic has worked. And then you look at Mediterranean Europe, where it's the sporting club, where you have all sports under the same banner. I mean, go to Barcelona, there's a tennis and rackets club there. There's a water polo club there. There's a cycling club there. Same with Sporting Lisbon. That is a sports club. South American clubs, they also have other sports under the club umbrella. If they're just a certain club may be known, especially TPS in Finland, is known for its ice hockey, has a basketball program. The difference is it's a community club, and then you go to over here, you have the football club, the rugby league club, the ice hockey club. They're all different. They may all be in the same town, but they have different. They don't communicate with each other. You go to Bracknell. I mean, yeah, where I live, up there in Bracknell, you have the ice hockey club that's now merged with Slough. It's now a Berkshire Hockey Club now. The rink's shut. It's a shame. You've got the bowls club, the cricket club, the football club, the rugby club. You've got 2 rugby clubs, actually. You've got Crowthorne and Abra. They're not under the same umbrella. They're different unities in themselves. Whereas if you go to Europe, all that will be under one umbrella. You'll have the ice hockey club, the rugby club, the football club, the rugby league club, the bowls club, the cricket club, because the Dutch play cricket, the ice skating club. Roller hockey is very popular in Spain and Portugal. Oh yeah, roller hockey is a thing. They all come under the same umbrella. It's how the club structures work. It just so happens if they're very good at one sport and they're national champions at one sport, they become famous for that. So Barcelona are famous for football, but the Barcelona Sports Club, they have a club president. The fans are the shareholders to a point. They elect the club president. They pay their membership fees. It's sort of that thing. I'm actually surprised that NBA viewership on TV, at least, is declining. It's one of the most profitable leagues in the US. I am surprised that is the thing, but you could look at their viewing demographic. But at the same time, why is the NBA not got a bigger presence in Europe? That's the interesting question. Why does the NBA not have a bigger presence in Europe? Same with, you could argue the NFL series in London. If the NFL was to have a team in London or in Europe, they would have had a team by now. And people go, oh, we should have a team in London. You've got to remember that the players' union don't want to do the travel. The team owners will go, well, is it going to make us money as well? Because we've got to play 8 away games in London. And what team are you going to relocate? Because you can't expand the NFL anymore. That's the thing. people going, oh, we should have an NFL team in London. The fan base is there. You've got the facilities at Tottenham and Wembley and all that. That's great. The thing is, those stadiums are used by other teams, and it does clash with the domestic football and rugby union seasons. So when you say we've had games at Twickenham, we've had games at Wembley, we've had games at White Hart Lane, that's great. Those facilities are used by other sports. I did a video on the NFL. Would they ever have a team in London? A couple of years ago. But it is interesting that you say that the NBA viewership is falling. Is that a one-off? Is that a long-term decline? Are fans switching off because it's the same teams winning? Which it does seem to be that only a couple of teams are winning every year. I think the NBA is not as competitive as it should be with the salary cap system in place. But the salary cap system in place means you can't overload a team with stars, even though it happens, because signing bonuses are a thing. But the NBA is an interesting league to look at. The only reason why the NBA or basketball as it is with the NBA as it is because of the NHL. The NHL is the reason the NBA exists, and that part of that was the NHL owners wanting to maximize their profits, because having basketball played meant you could have two sports take place in the same arena. You could maximize your profits. It was a Canadian decision, ironically. Basketball was actually invented by a Canadian in order to fill NHL arenas at the time. So when the NHL team isn't in town, the NBA takes place. It is an NHL decision, ironically, which hasn't necessarily benefited the NHL. But it is an interesting concept. But no, basketball, the EuroLeague is very popular. Basketball itself is not a sport that I'm a massive fan of. I know there's a fan base in this country. I know it is shown a lot on Sky and BT Sport. There is a fan base here. We do have the international series take place at the O2 when conditions allow. I mean, the Boston Celtics regularly play games over here. But they did interview the Boston Celtics CEO a couple of years ago, and the question was raised in relation to the NFL, because the NFL was having London series at the same time. Will there be a major league franchise in Europe? Because the NHL takes games all across Europe, pre-season and regular season. The NFL has obviously got its London series. The NBA takes games over here, and now Major League Baseball has started to take games over here. And the question was asked, will there be a major league franchise in Europe? And the Boston Celtics CEO, basically, bear in mind, the Boston Celtics, historically one of the most successful teams in NBA history, one of the most popular teams in the NBA, with a solid, massive fan base. The whole of Boston and New England is a Celtics fan, basically. If you're a basketball fan, one of the most profitable organisations, one of the most, winning organisations in history, and he says no. The Boston Celtics CEO, the chief executive officer, said it doesn't make financial sense to have a major league franchise based in London or any other European location like Paris or Berlin or Rome or wherever. It doesn't work. It wouldn't work. The time difference, the currency difference, you would have to, the travel would be a massive issue. I wouldn't say other sports grow, other sports decline. I think you have to look at it in a context. When you have a sport with a lot of scandal, it does switch fans off. When you make a sport unaffordable, it switches fans off. There's a reason why the NFL Europe didn't work. There's a reason why, the NFL London series, is it truly working? Because if it was, we would have had a team in London ages ago, which was the plan. I mean, I've done a video on it. If you go and look at my NFL playlist, I look at the chances of a team in London taking place and a Super Bowl taking place. And I go through all the stats and figures, and I go through all the quotes, and I go through all the financial stuff, get the whiteboard out, and I'm there for a good half hour discussing it. And it hasn't happened. They were meant to have a team in London by now. That was the plan. And then they came up with this international player pathway because they did realise there was a fan base here. And I will use the example of my mate Ollie. Now, my mate Ollie has got a very, very good job. He's a corporate accountant. He's on a very good salary. Very good salary. He went, I think, for the first 9 or so years. He didn't miss a single game. He went to the very first London Series game when he was a student. He went, I think, for the first 9 years, he didn't miss a game. And he said it's unaffordable. He did say doing the London Series, which isn't a full homestand, by the way, because you don't have a full 8-game series in London. It's only 4 games because it's unaffordable. Can't afford it. And he's a diehard NFL. He's a Pittsburgh Steelers. He's a Steelers fan, right? He's a hardcore NFL fan, has been for years, has been since he was a kid. And he goes, I can't afford it. I can't justify the expense. I cannot go anymore. He's on a really good salary, really good salary. And he goes, no, I can't afford to go anymore. It's not sustainable. It's not doable financially. And that, I think, is another problem the NFL is going to face. They did try in NFL Europe before. It didn't succeed. There's a reason for that. It just wasn't very good. They've already been here. They've already lost a lot of money with the NFL Europe. It didn't work. We've had, in the 90s, we had an experiment in the UK with a European UK North American Football League. It flopped. Wasn't great. They tried it for a couple of years, didn't succeed. They did try NFL Europe in the 90s and 2000s. It's not a thing anymore. Yes, there's a lot of US personnel in German army bases and all that. So there is obviously going to be a fan base there. There's a lot of expats in Germany. There's a lot of dual nationals in Germany. It didn't work before. I don't understand why the NFL are going to try and do it again. It failed. It cost the NFL a lot of money. Didn't work, and the quality of play was not great. And if you are an NFL fan, yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, the CFL tried to expand into the US about 20 years ago. It financially crippled them. They tried, it failed. There is reasons for that. Just because it's planned doesn't mean it will take place. And the NFL have to look at a whole host of reasons why. They've been there before, it didn't work. What's to say it's going to work again? Look at the AAF and the XFL. They haven't worked. It is a sport that, if it does go wrong, it's a financial flop, and it did cost the NFL a lot of money. They were pumping money in, and it became a black hole. It just became a money pit. It didn't make any money. I'm not sure on attendance per se, but there's a reason why they're not doing it now. Is the NRL popular in the UK? There are a fair few fans in the UK, and there's a reason why a lot of the best English players do go over to the NRL. The Burgess brothers obviously have tried their hand. All 4 of them have all played in the NRL. You've had, you've got a couple of good young English players right now over in the NRL. You've had Sutton. You've got You've got Hodgson, Herbie Farnsworth. There's some more going over. You've got Tom. There's quite a few gone over in the last couple of seasons. Adrian Morley, I think, was the starting point. I think George Williams has a great first season for Canberra. You've got a whole host of Whitehead at Canberra. George Williams, I think, has done very, very well. Halfbacks seem to be hit and miss with rugby league in Australia when they come over from the UK. I think the French will be the next nation in Europe to start having their top players go over to the NRL. I can see that happening in the next couple of seasons. There's a couple of good French players right now who really could set the NRL alight. There's a couple more English players that I think could give it a go. I mean, Ryan Hall didn't have the success, but he was always injured with his knees. So I think Ryan Hall went too late in his career. He had some bad knee injuries, and it didn't really work at the Roosters. He didn't score any tries, but he got stuck in. He played when he could. I think, yeah, the NRL is, I think, popular. We do have the World Club Challenge. We do get to see NRL games are broadcast over here. I've got the NRL website app, so I'm a subscriber to the NRL. I'm a massive fan of it. I prefer it. It does seem to be very, very popular. They mention even in commentary, what games are being broadcast live on Sky Sports over here. They mention if you watch on NRL.com, on social media, it's very active. I think there is a big fan base over here for the NRL. I think it's the better league out of the two. I think the quality of play is of the highest standard. There's a reason why the World Cup Challenge has been dominated by the Australian sides in recent years. I think the fact that more and more English players are trying their hand in the NRL, even for a couple of seasons. John Bateman, he's the example of where it hasn't worked, in the sense that, yes, he worked very well with the Canberra setup. There were already English players there like Hodgson and Whitehead. Sutton joined him as well. George Williams came over this season, so there was already a good core of English players there. So he could have settled in. And then, obviously, the contract dispute and the negative headlines surrounding that didn't go down well. But I think if it wasn't for Adrian Morley really going over in the 90s and the 2000s and leaving his mark with the Sydney Roosters, I don't think you get the Burgess brothers, Sam, the twins, and his older brother going over. You don't get Hodgson. You don't get Whitehead. You don't get George Williams. You don't get Bateman. You've had a few other players try their hand. I mean, Ryan Hall, I think, went a little bit late in his career. He should have gone about 5-6 years ago when he was at the peak of his powers, but he was having such a good time and successful time at Leeds. By the time he goes over there, he's damaged goods with the injuries that he'd sustained and the knee surgeries. He wasn't at his best. But at the same time, that's hindsight, but there's still a fair few players going over there and continue to go over there. There is no doubt on that. Yes, of course, most things that are planned never happen. I mean, look, the debate about the European Super League, the debate about, Project Restart and how that fell flat. These European Super League ideas have been muted for 20 years now. They pop up every couple of seasons. It's not UEFA sanctioned, so that doesn't go down well. There's a risk that if these clubs do want to form their own rival league, players could be barred from international competition for their national sides, and players want to play for their country. If you were to sign, I mean, that's Joel Thompson. There are some good players in the Super League who I do think could do quite well in the NRL. But then you've seen Sam Tompkins was hopeless. Zach Hardacre wasn't great. Although Zach Hardacre and Sam Tompkins had their off-field indiscretions. There was the Burgess who plays at Wigan. He was not very good at the Roosters. There have been a few flops, let's be honest. There have been some English players who've gone over there who haven't been great. And others like John Bateman, for the 2 years he was there, was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant player. His off-field contract dispute, whilst completely unnecessary, was in part because of player agents and the unscrupulous nature of player agents and their role in the game. I think we're going to see more top quality European talent, because I do believe with Catalan and Toulouse, there's going to be some more good players of French origin coming through that are going to get a shot in the NRL, who are going to get signed over, who are going to have an impact. That I have no doubt. The NRL is muting about having a look at expansion and adding 2 more teams. I can see more slots and places becoming available for English players and French players to go over and try their hand. At the same time, you look at the players that have gone over to the NRL and those that have stuck it out in the NRL. It speaks for itself. The quality of player leaving the Super League and going to the NRL is generally pretty high. There is enough of a draw still that you look at what Adrian Morley achieved in the NRL and his time there, and the impact that had on more players going, I want to be like Adrian Morley. The fact that the initial wave of Super League players going over were forwards tells its own tale. James Graham, obviously, he's now got Australian citizenship. When his time finishes, he's going back. He will have a role with either the Dragons or the Bulldogs or in the media in Australia. He's going back to Australia. He wants to bring his kids up in Australia. He's wanting to finish his career at St Helens, which is completely understandable. He was gone as an NRL player. So it is interesting that James Graham, who can't cut it in the NRL anymore because he just hasn't got the pace or the fitness, can still compete in the Super League. It shows there is a quality gap. But there are some brilliant players in the Super League who I think their talent isn't necessarily being wasted, but I think they could still have a massive impact in the NRL, even if it's just a handful of seasons. And Herbie Farnsworth going over as a teenager is an interesting one. Yes, he played in a very disappointing Broncos side. He was one of their best players, Herbie Farnsworth, when he played. He was one of those few players that never let his head drop, and he kept putting 110% in every game they played. He had some injuries and missed a few games, but Herbie Farnsworth, I think, is a player we need to watch. George Williams, let's see how he has a second season. That second season is going to be interesting for George Williams, how he continues to develop. Josh Hodgson, he's had a few knee injuries now. Is he nearing the end of his career? We'll see with Josh Hodgson. But there's some good English players in the Super League. I think it is. No, it is popular. The NRL is popular in the UK. I'm more of an NRL fan than a Super League fan. I have been for years. A long time. I generally think the quality of play is higher. Now, comparing and contrasting the two over the last, I'm going to say 5-6 years, there is a marked difference in the quality level and the player production level and the development of players coming in. There is no dispute for me that the better of the two leagues is the NRL. And that wasn't always the case. The Super League war in the 90s, a lot of top quality Australian players and Kiwis came over here for a couple of years because there was an uncertainty about will they have clubs to play for, will they get paid. So the mid-90s, yes, there was a mass influx of top quality players coming over from what is now the NRL to here because there was a division within the game. And this is where rival leagues. So when we discuss the European Super League kind of format with football, the Super League in Australia failed. The Murdoch idea of having a rival league failed because it was financially unsustainable. Look at North America. Look at the going back to the 70s now, the WHA in ice hockey. It lasted less than a decade. It failed. It became unsustainable. And it wasn't because of a lack of play or lack of quality or lack of entertainment. It was financially unviable because they were overpaying players to come over from the NHL. And then they got the European players to come in. But they were on bigger contracts and the money wasn't there. And it became unviable. The same happened with the Super League in Australia when the New South Wales Rugby League and the Super League war took place in the mid-90s. It nearly destroyed the game because the Super League idea was to pay these players massive money. The New South Wales Rugby League clubs at the time, the salaries were minuscule. They weren't on the same level. A lot of these guys had second jobs to supplement their income. And what ended up happening is the Super League idea, it bankrupted the game. It caused massive financial hardship to the game. And players just wanted to play. They were offered big money with the Super League, or they were offered to stay in their current clubs, which became the NRL. And the wages weren't sustainable. It was to do with TV deals, and it was to do with, it's the same with the Premier League kind of format with an increased TV deal, increased TV money. And people forget that the formation of the Premier League here in the UK was down to a breakdown in relationship between the EFL, the FA, and 16 clubs. The top 16 of the clubs in the old Division 1 had a breakdown in relationship with the EFL. And then you look at the Leeds owners who came up with the idea of a Premier League 2, a rival league to the Championship, League 1 and League 2, because they weren't happy with the TV deal. Now, Leeds got promotion, so that idea's gone to bed, but other clubs start to sign up to it because there, again, is a breakdown in trust between the EFL and the Premier League to a certain extent, the FA and the clubs. It is going to be interesting to see what happens going forward if the European Super League does take place, which I hope it doesn't, because ironically, club football, I've gone off. I still like international football. And what UEFA have basically said, if they've hinted at, is if this European Super League, and the fans aren't on board, the fans, even the fans of the clubs that want to join this European Super League aren't happy with it. But if this European Super League was to happen, this format, UEFA have said it's not UEFA sanctioned. We will bar players who play for these clubs playing for their countries. That's the thing. In the FIFA World Cup qualifying, for example, That's still UEFA sanctioned competition. These players do risk basically being banned from playing international football and being in the wilderness. These could be top class players, and fans aren't on board with it either. If you can't get your fans behind it, you don't have a product. You don't have a product. What we have seen without fans in attendance, we are more crucial to being at games than European football claimed. They claimed, with the TV money, that fans, we could let them in for free. That was a lie. They were basically trying to say to us, you're not that cool. Turns out fans in attendance is more important for football than the clubs claimed. Because the TV companies signed up to show broadcast games saying, we've got full stadiums. Look at these stadiums. They are full. It's a great product to sell. And in reality, there is a breakdown in trust, and fans aren't happy with a whole host of things. And this is before COVID. The pay-per-view format that the Premier League brought in was a disaster. Notice, so far this new year, they haven't brought it back. They said we're going to get rid of it for now and we'll reassess it in January. It's now January. There is nothing on the table of bringing back pay-per-view games. I think the Premier League has had its toe in the water and gone, it doesn't work. Now, bearing in mind, in good times, back in the 2000s, Premier League did come up with Sky Sports for a pay-per-view format. And it didn't work. It lasted a season and fans just didn't buy into it. So, there you go. Bit off topic, but again, this is things that are planned that never happen. Going back to that question, this European Super League idea has been on the back burner for 2 decades. It's basically a way of the big clubs pressurising UEFA and their domestic leagues to give them concessions. It's basically what it is. They use it as a leverage. And they're going to cry wolf one time too many, and then it unfortunately will negatively impact. And from the fans' response, it hasn't been great. And with the rise of social media, the response itself speaks for itself in all reality. The fans' response to when the Premier League idea with Man United and Liverpool came up with this idea to shrink the Premier League, and which would have meant shrinking the Football League, which would have meant 2 clubs being massively impacted somewhere, went down like a lead balloon and was voted down straight away. Didn't go down very well. And that was going in concurrent with this European Super League format. That didn't go down very well because it threatened to devalue the domestic game for the benefit of a few. And that didn't go down very well. Same with the idea of, we should just put Rangers and Celtic in the English league system. That idea has been floating around for 20 odd years. Never come to fruition. Ever. And in that period of time, Rangers have gone bust and had to reform. So, we've had these ideas of transplanting teams and setting up new leagues, and it hasn't worked. They've never come to fruition. They're normally used as leverage. And it's normally in order to make a small proportion of clubs more wealthy. Not for the benefit of the game, just for the benefit of the owners. We've seen this in North American football, in the NFL. When the CFL expanded into the US, it financially crippled the CFL. The effects are still being felt 20 years on. The CFL this season, for example, couldn't take place. Had the CFL not expanded into the US 20 years ago, they would have had the financial, backdrop of saved finances in order to get the CFL play behind closed doors this season. The CFL overextended itself 20 years ago and has never fully recovered. The AAF and the XFL have had 2 iterations, and the AAF didn't even complete a full season. When you set up rival leagues, it's generally, it doesn't go down very well. We need a structured league structure in place. And the NRL, I think, has benefited from the Super League war. It's still feeling some of the effects. Some of the clubs still haven't fully recovered, and some of the fan base was switched off by it all when their clubs were thrown out of the top level competition in the rationalisation period in the late 90s, early 2000s. There has been a lingering resentment towards the governing body, the Commission in Australia, for the best part of 20 years. They haven't fixed all the problems from the Super League war in Australia when it came to the NRL and Super League. There is still issues there. Same with Super League in this country when they switched from a winter format to a summer format. Not all fans have really gone with that, and crowd numbers would suggest, and the money side of things would suggest it hasn't necessarily worked. But it's been 26 years since they switched from a winter league to a summer league. Rugby league is one of those sports that doesn't have good governance. It's the best way to describe it. Rugby league doesn't have good governance. The club game is exceptionally entertaining, but the governance side of it leaves a lot to be desired, in my personal opinion. And I'm a rugby league fan. The obsession by the RFL in this country for the north of England, I think, is at the detriment of the Broncos and the Scholars down here in the southeast. The game could absolutely grow in the south of England, and I'm hoping this World Cup helps with that. On the same token, the experiment with the Toronto Wolfpack didn't go very well. That became an expensive failure. And now the Ottawa Aces are saying, we're going to wait a year before we join. They may never join the Super League structure at all. Don't get me wrong, there is a fan base for rugby league in North America. There is. However, the way they've handled the Toronto expansion and now Ottawa's expansion hasn't been handled very, very well. It actually became a bit of a disaster, quite frankly. You could argue that the TV package isn't great, hence why the RFL had to go to the government for emergency aid during the beginning of the crisis. They had to get an emergency bailout. And over in Australia, the Australian Rugby League media picked up on that with the bailout for the Super League and the Championship and League One and the amateur game, going, it's not great over there. And yeah, the money side of things, the finances of rugby league aren't great. There's a lot of precarious situations where clubs are verging, teetering financially. And you could look at the Bradford Bulls and the Widnes Vikings as two examples of clubs that have hit financial roadblocks. They have not got the administration of their clubs right. And the Bradford Bulls, being one of the most successful teams in the Super League era, are on their knees. They can't even play at their home stadium. And the RFL has a stake in their home stadium at Odsal. That tells you all you need to know about the situation with the Bradford Bulls. The Widnes situation isn't great either. They're a very historical club, really up the financial spout. You know, there are concerns that other clubs aren't well run. Very few clubs make a lot of money. Hence why, even though there's a salary cap system, the same clubs are always in the grand final for the Challenge Cup and the Super League grand final. Whereas in Australia, the NRL, I think only 2 teams haven't made the grand final. Or 1 team hasn't made the grand final, and 2 teams out of all the teams in the league haven't actually got a premiership title to their name. It just tells you the competitiveness of the NRL compared to the Super League. You look at the NRL, it's the Warriors have had 2 grand final defeats, and the Gold Coast Titans haven't made a grand final. Other than that, all the other teams in the NRL have got at least 1 grand final victory to their name and 1 title to their name. And there's the difference. There's the difference in the two leagues. You look at it since, I think, I'm going to say since 1998, only 6 teams have won the Super League grand final here in the UK. Since the NRL era in Australia, you look at it, and you can look at the historical titles as well, and you put them into the mix. Of the current sides, the disparity between who's won what is there. It is there, and it's striking. It is striking. You look at it and where teams have finished and who's got what. It is striking. The complete difference in competitive level that there is. That is something to note. It would be nice for a new team to win the Super League. It would be. It would be nice for another team to win the Challenge Cup that hasn't won it before. It would actually be a breath of fresh air for the sport. And that, I think, also limits the appeal, as there's not enough teams competing to win for the first time. It's always the same names you have on the trophy. It's always the same names in that grand final. The NRL, this year we had Penrith for the first time since 2003 in the grand final. Yes, they didn't win. They came close. But they could actually return to the grand final as soon as this year. They could have a sustained period of success over the next couple of seasons. Penrith haven't been successful since 2003. Parramatta haven't had any success since the 80s, and they've had a couple of grand finals in that time. I think there's been two, 2001, 2009. They're relevant again. The Brisbane Broncos getting the wooden spoon. That's never happened before. There is a power shift in the NRL because of the salary cap and because of player development. It's a thing. I think every team at the start of each season, apart from one or two, has the chance to win the grand final. The debate is there. You could say the same about European football not having a universal salary cap system sanctioned by UEFA. We know financial fair play doesn't work. We know that there are calls from some of the lower leagues and some of the less financially well-off leagues in the professional game in Europe to go, we need a salary cap. Those calls are growing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in this transfer window in January, what actually happens, what players go where and for what money, because I can't see clubs justifying massive spends considering the financial situation that the sport in general finds itself. The fact that a rescue package had to be organised at the beginning of December for League One and League Two and the Championship just to see clubs through without fans in attendance tells you all you need to know. Oh, Man City are winning 3-0 against Chelsea. And that's with 6 players missing, so that's really interesting. Leicester Tigers have beaten Bath in the Rugby Union. What else have we got? This is interesting, right? So we've seen all these COVID breaches by players and coaching staff in a variety of sports. Even netball now has made the COVID breach headlines. A Manchester Thunder player has been suspended for breaking coronavirus rules. The Thunder said photos on social media clearly showed a player at a New Year's Eve party with people outside their household. In England, obviously, it's illegal to meet people outside your household or support bubble indoors in Tier 4 areas. Now, me and my neighbour are in the same support bubble because we're both single occupancies. We've been doing this now for, since the summer. We've been hanging out, so it's fine. The Thunder declined to comment or confirm the identity of the player when contacted by BBC Sport. In an earlier statement, the club managing director said she was extremely disappointed by the breach. It's a breach of trust of everyone involved with the Thunder. For the other players making huge sacrifices to be able to trade in COVID secure ways as an elite sports people, for our fans who are making huge sacrifices to try and reduce the spread and keep people safe, and for the members of the Thunder family who have been on the front line of the NHS in this pandemic, we are despite regular reminders of responsibilities as individuals, netballers, and role models for girls, the player decided to have a good time. That was more important to them. So interesting they haven't named their player. Not that many sports fans who aren't netball fans would know who that player is, but it shows that there is an issue within British sport of players just not following the regs. So there's that. Obviously, Chelsea losing 3-0. There is a lot of mounting pressure on Frank Lampard from the Chelsea fan base online. I am surprised that Man City have gone 3-0 up, but at the same time, I think they're frustrated. They've not played. I think it was Everton. The game was cancelled at the last minute. They haven't played a league game for a while because of COVID. They've got games in hand. The question was raised earlier, where do I think Man City finish? Well, they have a chance to leapfrog Chelsea and get sort of back into the conversation in the table, because it's very congested in the chase for Europe. I still think the top 3 are going to be the top 3 at the end of the season. I think Leicester, Man United, and Liverpool have that separation now between the other teams. But Man City have had their own negative headlines with a whole host of players obviously breaching COVID rules and football's club protocols. It does raise questions about the club protocols that are put in place. I'm open to any other questions before I go, so get your questions in while you have the chance. I've just droned on enough, I think. Some interesting questions so far. I'm open to any more questions now, and then I'll do my best to answer them as best I can. I think some of the questions that have been put forward have been really interesting so far. I'm just going to go through them quickly, see if I've answered them all. So, where do I think Man City will finish at the moment? Yes, they're winning 3-0, but I still think they will not make the top 3. London clubs aren't doing very well. Off-field discipline of a lot of players seems to be a problem. It's not just football players, as we've just found out. We've discussed Ben Stokes and cricket. We've discussed Freddie Flintoff. We've discussed Kevin Peterson. We've discussed British international ice hockey players, NBA viewership, NBA apparently European. Discussed a planned European-style NFL league again, but they failed before. Discussed the NRL being popular in the UK. Yes, it is very expensive to run an American football team. That's another question that was posed because you have such large rosters and you've got a lot of support staff. We've Joel Thompson, yeah, that's a player to keep an eye on, and that's up to all the questions. If you've got any more questions, get them in now. I'll be interested to see what other questions you have. I mean, it is interesting. Before I answer more questions, the India, I think 5 players have had to isolate because they were in a Melbourne restaurant. There's been I think 5 players have had to isolate in the Indian Test side in Australia for cricket. That's interesting tonight. But as far as I know, there's no real massively breaking headlines right at this moment. So any more questions that you guys have would be interesting. I'm going to grab myself a beer. So I'll be back in a sec. Get your questions in. Let's go to It does help when I don't. In the UK, is legal union more popular? Rugby union is more popular. It's got more registered players and more registered clubs. I used to play for my local rugby club a decade ago. Problem is, rugby league is predominantly a northern game. So if you know the geography of the UK, it's mostly played in Lancashire and Yorkshire and a bit of Cheshire. That's where the best teams are located. It is a shame. It's a great game. It's a simpler game to play, but rugby union is more popular. It's played in more schools. It's played in more universities, and it has more registered clubs and more registered players. Part of the reason for that is the mainstream media coverage. The international game in rugby union is better organised. There's more internationals. But rugby union has a better TV deal. And I've looked at the stats. There are more registered rugby union clubs. There is more rugby union played at school. More schools sign up for rugby union and rugby league. Rugby league is more regional, and that is the problem. Although we do have professional clubs in the south of England, there's only a handful. It's predominantly played in Lancashire and Yorkshire. So if you know your geography, if you're not from the UK, the north of England is where rugby league is predominantly played, and that is a problem. It's very. I don't know. I think you've got the traditionalists, and then you've got those who want to expand the game. This World Cup coming up at the end of the year in October. It's weird that we're in 2021 now. I did a video on the Rugby League World Cup, looking at the stadiums that were announced. That was a couple of years ago. That's shocking that we're in 2021. But the rugby union is more popular. Conversely, rugby league is more popular in Australia. It's a culture. I think it is a cultural thing, but at the same time, it's. I wouldn't say rugby union is more accessible because I think there should be a drive to get more rugby league in schools. The RFL is now changing its strategy somewhat when it comes to growing the game in the south of England. But at the moment, as things stand, there are more players playing rugby union. There's more media coverage. There's a better international game. Obviously, we've got the Six Nations every year. We've got the summer internationals. We've got the tour games where the Northern Hemisphere teams go to the Southern Hemisphere and vice versa. We've got the Lions series. Whereas in rugby league, the Lions went on hiatus for 12 years, which I think was a massive shame. But again, that's to do with money. Interesting question, though. I'm assuming you're from Australia. Please put in where you're from around the world, because it'd be very interesting to see, where you're from and what sports you like, because this is a multi-sport channel. I mean, if you look at my playlist, I've got loads of sports. I might do a series on the Gaelic Amateur Association with hurling and Gaelic football. I might have to do a bit of research on that. Wow, Australia, that's quite early in the morning over there. Yeah, it is interesting. that rugby league is more popular in Australia, but it's again regional. The AFL has a far bigger reach in Australia, being played in every state and territory at a high level, whereas rugby league, it's mostly on the East Coast, and that's a problem. If the NRL wants to be classed itself as a national competition, it has to expand to Perth. It has to look at Adelaide. It has to have a look at possibly having a team in Geelong, for example, really taking it to the AFL in their traditional locations. Because as things stand, it's an East Coast orientated game. But no, rugby union is more popular here. We have more player depth. We have more registered players. The RFU is the wealthiest union in the world. It is an interesting question, though. It's interesting how it all came about. But rugby league in Australia is popular in Queensland and New South Wales. Whether it's growing in popularity in the state of Victoria with the Melbourne Storm and their consistent success will be interesting. I don't necessarily think it needs less Sydney teams. I think they need to look with 2 extra locations, possibly a second team in New Zealand, possibly, Perth, possibly Adelaide. They did play State of Origin in Adelaide this year. There's clearly fans in Adelaide and Western Australia. The rugby league's been there before with the Adelaide Rams and the Perth Western Reds. There is quite a solid rugby league competition in Western Australia. It is an interesting question that you raise. I think you should try and I wouldn't necessarily change things up too much in Sydney personally. I think there is fan bases there. The teams seem to share the success. Dual venture clubs. I'm not keen on the West Tigers and I'm not keen on the St George Illawarra Dragons. I think merging those clubs together hasn't necessarily worked. Look at Manly. That didn't with the Northern Eagles. That didn't really work. It fell apart very quickly. You could argue, could you relocate teams? I mean, Cronulla seems to be the one that everyone picks on. They own their own stadium, unlike other sides. They actually have some real estate they own, and they're part of that part of the Greater Sydney area. But you could argue having another team in Queensland. You could argue having a team in Perth and Adelaide and South Island, New Zealand, because the Warriors are having obviously played their home games. They're coming over here this season. They've relocated for the pre-season, so the Warriors aren't playing in New Zealand at all this season. That'd be the best part of 2 years where they haven't played in New Zealand. So the future of the Warriors being in New Zealand, I could see them being fully permanently relocated on the Central Coast. I could see that happening, which would be a shame because they are a great side and they've done a lot for rugby league in New Zealand. Could you argue there's too many? The debate about are there too many teams in Sydney? I'm not sure. Want to keep the fan base inside. I would say expansion rather than relocation is the way forward for the NRL long term. Get it up to 18 teams. The NRL has proven they can have 20 teams before in the late 90s. I think Perth and Adelaide would be prime locations. Bearing in mind they've played State of Origin in Adelaide this past season. They've been to Perth and played matches on the road in Perth as well. I would definitely say Perth and Adelaide are underutilised sports markets when it comes to the NRL. They could definitely put teams there, and I think they would work. At the same time, the issues with NRL governance is a problem. And obviously, I followed the Todd Greenberg saga from day one. And then when this channel started, becoming a thing in 2017, I followed the Rugby League World Cup in 2017. I really started following the NRL more religiously, watching as many games as possible. I'm midway through my NRL season previews. I've still got half the league to do. But yes, having State of Origin played in Adelaide this year was interesting. With fans in attendance, they sold out their ticket allocation. So had there been allowed full fans in attendance, the Adelaide would have been packed to capacity. So there is a rugby league fan base in Adelaide. Bearing in mind with the travel restrictions that Australia had in place at the time, the locals signed up for it. There clearly is an interest for rugby league in Adelaide. Same with Perth. Every time that in a regular season with no travel restrictions and no fan restrictions, when clubs in the NRL go and play games in Perth, they've had good attendances. The attendances have been good. And I think Perth are sort of angry that the Western Force have lost their Super Rugby franchise. I think Perth, yes, well, they have got AFL teams in Perth. Having a single team in Perth, I think you could unite a fan base. It's a fast-growing city. It's got over 1 million people. You've got the corporate money there. You've got a pretty solid Western Australian competition. There are players who have been born in Western Australia who are currently playing in the NRL. I think that would be a very good location to go back to. Yes, obviously travel would be one of the concerns with the distance from Perth from the East Coast, but at the same time, you could work out the fixture list so it won't be that much of an impact on the team. Same with New Zealand and the Warriors. In a normal season, they would have to have one home, one away, and there's travel to consider. But again, I think Perth and Adelaide in the past, people have been, there's not enough corporate money there. The AFL works there very, very well. They have several teams in the Adelaide area, so you're splitting the fan base. But at the same time, with State of Origin this year, you look at the crowd numbers, it was a pretty good turnout considering the restricted fan numbers allowed. They sold out the ticket allocation. So I would say in the future, absolutely, I think it's doable. It is feasible. And, you know, it is a very doable project. It's whether there's the willingness to do it. It's whether the NRL Players Association also would have to have a vote on it. The current ownership groups of the clubs would have to have a vote on it. Whether they'll be happy having 2 extra teams in, but you can have bye weeks. It's not impossible to do it. And if they took State of Origin there to these, they've taken State of Origin to these locations over the last couple of years. The fans turn up. There are fans there. And Perth and Adelaide. I mean, Adelaide has got some logistical problems, I think, with infrastructure. To do with the city's infrastructure, that's transport links, but at the same time, underutilized markets that could actually work very, very well. In my opinion, they would work very, very well. On the same token, there's been rumours of an expansion at the end of this current TV deal, which was obviously renegotiated by Peter V'landys. But again, you have to look at the NRL governance. Now that we've got Andrew Abdo in charge, it seems that the NRL seems to have the right governance in place. It's just taken too long to get to this stage. This is where we go back to the Super League war in the mid-90s and the effects still being felt. You look at the West Tigers, you look at the St George Illawarra Dragons. These are joint venture clubs. This is part of the problem. Could you say there's too many teams in Sydney? Well, they argued this in the late 90s, early 2000s, hence why the Northern Bears aren't a thing anymore. Western Suburb Magpies aren't a team anymore. The Newtown Jets went out of business in the 80s from the top flight, but you could argue, yes, there may be one or too many teams in Sydney. Sydney's a massive city. If you were to look at Sydney and you come over here and you look at London and the amount of rugby union clubs we have in London, we have 2 rugby league clubs in London, a whole host of ice hockey teams in London playing at lower levels, but they're there. There isn't an overall London team. You have the amount of what you would call soccer, what I call football, Premier League, Championship, League One and League Two clubs. There are loads of teams in London and that surrounding geographical location. It is interesting. Oh yeah, look, Central Coast, they already have a nice stadium there. The Warriors have proven that there is a fan base there who will buy into a team. The Redcliffe Dolphins is another talking point because they're saying they've got an ownership group ready, they've got the money behind them. The Redcliffe Dolphins in the lower grades have got a very good, player development program. But I look at last season when fans were allowed back in the Central Coast. They really bought into the Warriors playing there. They adopted the team. It would work. It could work. But then you're still going, there's still another New South Wales team. I think they need to look outside New South Wales. They need to look at possibly, I would say they'd be brave to go to another team into Victoria. Travel wouldn't be a problem. Geelong is there. Yes, they've got a very successful AFL team as well, but you could put a second team in the Greater Melbourne area. I have no doubt on that. You could have a second team in Brisbane. Yeah, you could argue the Gold Coast Titans are just outside Brisbane. You've got two teams in southern Queensland, but you could have a team in Ipswich. I think the NRL need to be brave, and they need to, if they do expand to 18 teams, they need to really make sure that if they are going to Adelaide or going to Perth or the South Island, New Zealand, or another team in Queensland, another team outside of Sydney and New South Wales, they get it right. But they need to be brave. And unfortunately, I think they've been a bit conservative since the Gold Coast Titans joined. They've been very conservative. But the NRL has proved you can have 20 teams. They've done it before. They have shrunk the league, but they had a bigger league before. And I think there is enough talented players in reserve, well, the lower second reserve grade, or what was reserve grade in the Queensland New South Wales Cup competitions to promote them. There's enough interest for English players wanting to come to Australia from the Super League. I think you have got enough player talent, and there is fans there. So I think it is doable. It's whether the NRL is willing to do it, and with the current financial situation, whether they're brave enough to do it. But this discussion has been had that when Todd Greenberg was in charge, he did state we would discuss expansion, not really expansion, and this is crucial at the end of the current TV deal. Now, Peter V'landys has renegotiated the TV deal to get us through this difficult period, and I'm saying that as an NRL fan. I'm a Raiders fan, so if you look at my channel, I'm a bit of a Raiders fan. The interesting thing to note, this is what's very interesting, is Todd Greenberg's gone. And Todd Greenberg's period of time in charge was beset by scandal off the field with players. It's still happening now. That needs to change. The NRL needs to change its public image. It's not the product. The product's brilliant. The rule change this season have had a positive impact. The 6-again rule and a single referee have worked. Players and club officials misbehaving doesn't help the image. It is a problem. That is the issue. That's the problem. Is the public perception is that rugby league players and rugby league officials, there is always scandal. There's always misbehaviour. We've seen it throughout this season and in past seasons. And you could put some of that down to weak leadership in the NRL, and you could put a lot of the blame at Todd Greenberg's door. You could also put it down to a culture within the sport that needs to change. But looking at it, changes need to be made. And players need to, wake their ideas up a little bit. The issues that we had with Josh Addo-Carr and Latrell Mitchell, amongst others, misbehaving. And I'm using them as examples because, they got reprimanded by their clubs. You've got Nathan Cleary with his TikTok videos, Pangai Jr. with the alleged third-party payments and repetitive COVID breaches. How about the whole Brisbane team repetitively breaching COVID protocols during the season? The Jack de Belin situation that is ongoing, which is a big problem for the Dragons. These negative headlines over the last couple of seasons are a problem. They are. You've got to try and sell it to the new locations. Now, one thing that works in the NRL's advantage is what happens on the East Coast, in Perth and Adelaide, they don't really pay attention because they've got the AFL and they've got the A-League to focus on in those locations. But the issue is, I think player behaviour, it damages the brand, damages the product. I'm drinking Foster's, which obviously is not drunk in Australia, even though it says Melbourne on the can. I am aware that Foster's isn't that popular in Australia. It's actually brewed by Heineken these days, so it's not even Aussie beer anymore. We've crafted this beer to a thirst-quenching perfection. Enjoy it ice cold, just as William and Ralph Foster would have wanted. Brewed in Europe by Heineken UK Limited. It's brewed in Scotland. Foster's. I got it given as a Christmas present, so I've got free beer, but it's not actually that desirable that I'm drinking it because it's here. But you've asked some good questions about Sydney teams. Should there be more? Should there be less? That is an ongoing debate and point that the NRL has had for 20 years. But thanks for your questions. I do appreciate them. Any other questions anyone's got? Because I'm going to wind this stream down in a minute. But I'll be interested to see if anyone else has got any other questions before I wind it down. The rugby league questions on the NRL are very interesting. Interesting debating points. It's a different point of view, especially if you've got someone from Australia, commenting, "Oh, we've got too many teams in Sydney." That is a debating point that's been had for 20 years. Let's have a look to see what the Chelsea score is, because it was 3-0 last time I checked. It'll be interesting to see what the score is now. Let's have a look. Chelsea are having a bit of a rough time of it lately. There are calls for Frank Lampard to go. Let's have a little look, see, shall we? But still 3-0. We could have a quick look at Mendy. Benjamin Mendy, Man City disappointed after defender breaches COVID-19 protocols. This is another Man City player, even though they're winning today. Manchester City said they're disappointed after Benjamin Mendy breached COVID-19 rules by hosting a New Year's Eve party. A spokesman for the French international said the 26-year-old held a dinner party with guests from outside his household. The mixture of households indoors is banned under Tier 4 restrictions. City said they would conduct an internal investigation. He was named on the bench today for their game. While it's understood that elements of this incident have been misinterpreted in the reports carried by newspapers earlier, and that the player has publicly apologised for his error, the club is disappointed to learn of the transgression and will be conducting an internal investigation. A spokesperson from Mendy said Benjamin and his partner allowed a chef and two friends of his partners to attend his property for a dinner on New Year's Eve. Ben accepts that this is a breach of COVID-19 protocols and he's sorry for his actions in the matter. He's had a COVID test and is liaising with Man City about this, explaining why Mendy was in his matchday squad on Sunday. Guardiola told Sky Sports, first of all, the club made a statement. Second, Benjamin's already had a COVID test in the past. He's tested every day like all of us and he's negative. 6 players are currently missing from the Man City starting lineup. Ederson, Ferran Torres, Tommy Doyle, Kyle Walker, Gabriel Jesus and Eric Garcia. So that's 6 of them. Early today, Garcia tested positive. There's another member of staff. They've postponed their match against Everton on the 28th. When they're going to play that, I don't know. There have been a number of apparent coronavirus breaches at players at a variety of Premier League clubs, and this is where talking about players misbehaving earlier in the stream, and if you're still listening, Tottenham criticised 3 of their players after they attended the party over Christmas. Fulham are looking at reports of Mitrovic, Palace, Mihailovic, who's Mitrovic's Serbian teammate at international level. Fulham's match against Burnley today was cancelled, postponed. It's going to be interesting. There's a whole host of Premier League players and clubs involved in that. Any other questions before I wind it up? Because it's been an interesting stream this evening. I am surprised with the Chelsea scoreline at the moment, considering Man City are missing all those players. But at the same time, they're missing 6 first-team regulars. Could that come to hurt them later on? Possibly. Squad depth will be tested by clubs at this time. Any other questions? Anybody? Because there's some interesting stuff that we can discuss. The fact that players are repeatedly breaching the protocols in place shows there's weak governance from the FA and the Premier League and the Football League when it comes to clubs. Because I look at the lower leagues and the amount of games postponed is ridiculous. So if you're a fan of a Championship, League One, League Two side, a non-league side, lots of games have been postponed over the last week. It is a ridiculous number. How they're going to get these games played, I have no idea. But that's something to look at. Rugby union's been impacted as well. I know that much. I know some of Exeter games were postponed. So if you're a Chiefs fan, that's an ongoing saga there because they've got to be fixture then. But any other questions? Any questions at all? Otherwise, I'm going to call it a night. I mean, we've discussed a fair bit, but any other questions at all? No more questions? All right, then. In that case, I'm going to call this stream a night. It's been interesting topics discussed. A lot more in rugby league than I thought, which is a nice change. interesting to talk about the NRL and whether it should expand and the debate about the teams in Sydney and where they could go to. It's very interesting. That was a nice change. But no, yeah, thank you very much for all your questions. Over the next coming days, I'll get some more videos posted. I'll have a look at the transfer news and the European football transfer market. I am still going, yes. I was about to wind it down, but if you've got any other questions to raise, I mean, I know Man City are 3-0 up against Chelsea with a depleted lineup. De Bruyne, I think, scored the third goal. Chelsea are in a bit of a wobble. They haven't done so well the last couple of weeks. But if you've got any other questions, just get them in quick. I'm going for another 15 minutes, call it 2 hours, and then wind it up. But if you've got any other questions, just whack them in there. We've discussed the NRL since you were last on. They could. It'll be interesting to see because Benjamin Mendy has obviously come back with negative tests. He's obviously being internally dealt with by the club. But there's 6 players missing from Man City at the moment. And there's a whole host of support staff. I read a couple of articles while you were away. The situation, though, is it's not just Man City that have got players breaching protocols. Fulham, Crystal Palace, Man City, and then you go to the lower leagues, there's a whole host of clubs. But there appears to be a mass discipline issue. And we were discussing, NRL player discipline while you were off, discussing about expansion and should the NRL move out of, add 2 more teams where they could go and all this. The fact that if you look at the football fixture list since Christmas, it's not just the Premier League that have had games cancelled. If you're a fan of a Championship club or a League One or League Two or the non-league, the amount of postponing games is ridiculous. I think I'm not sure the FA and the various leagues, not just the Football League and the Premier League, have allowed enough flexibility to get some of these postponed games played. That's the concern I have, is that we could have a whole spate of postponed games and they don't have the flexibility to play them. That's a criticism I think European football should have. I'm also surprised the NFL has managed to get every single game played with the amount of COVID outbreaks they've had. That's just amazing and ridiculous. And when you look at, let's say, the NHL, and the NBA has obviously just restarted, but look at the NHL, they'll be looking at the NFL and how they got through that. And NHL squads are smaller than NFL squads, and then they'll be looking at it going, should we go ahead with our season? They're planning to start on the 13th, but there's that to consider. And then, Major League Baseball had all their issues when they restarted play in the summer as well, with outbreaks all over the place and games affected. So it'll be interesting to see how football in England and Scotland, Wales has been decimated. There's no Welsh football taking place. Reduced fixtures. Interesting. I don't know. If you were to start reducing the rest of the fixture list and altering the season like we had last season, with League One and League Two not completing, the non-league not completing, points per game being brought in, it does raise a lot of headaches that the Football League, the Premier League, and the FA would like to avoid. We've already seen that they've said there's no FA Cup replays this year. The League Cup, there's no home and away legs for semi-finals this year. They look like going to be permanent changes long term, I would have thought. The Champions League and Europa League knockout stages do start in the coming weeks. That's going to be interesting how that impacts. Oh yeah, look, other sports have already said. Look at the Super League. They couldn't complete the season because 2 clubs had COVID outbreaks and meant they couldn't field teams. I think it was Wakefield Trinity Wildcats had 3 games cancelled and they were declared losses, and then Hull FC, or was it Hull KR, came out and said, yeah, we've got 17 positive tests. What is interesting is the NRL, when they resumed play, reduced the length of the season. When the suspension came in, they were on a 25-game season, I believe, with bye weeks. They reduced it to 20 rounds of fixtures, which meant every team played each other once, plus 5 teams would play each other twice. And that was sorted out in an 8-week period. The NRL said, well, we've got 8 weeks. The AFL said, we've already, as soon as the pandemic hit, they went, no, we're reducing the season to 17 regular. So each team plays each other once. And they actually proactively, they reacted to the situation, took the time off to go, right, we're going to make fixture changes and amend the schedule. We're going to discuss things with the TV broadcasters because the broadcasters obviously hold a lot of sway with TV rights. And then we're going to resume to play if we can. They also sought government assistance as well to support the lower grades. But the AFL and the NRL reduced their seasons, reduced their fixtures, got their seasons completed, and then went into a full off season. So the pre-season has now started in Australia for the NRL. The Warriors have come over. They're not going to be home again until October. Now, whether the State of Origin takes place at the normal timing mid-season or at the end of the season, we'll have to wait and see. But the NRL is planning for a full 28-week season with bye weeks. They are planning for a full season. I'm assuming the AFL will be planning for a full season as well. I don't think either of those leagues can afford to have reduced seasons this year. I can't see it happening. So look for them to be the barometer for professional sport because they came back, in May. Is it harder for football to reduce fixtures on sports like rugby, seem more flexible? I think with football, a whole host of things come into play. You've got the knockout cup competitions. You have transcontinental cup competitions in the Europa League and Champions League. You've got the regular league season fixtures. The TV companies have a lot of sway in that because the TV deals are worth so much money, especially for the Premier League and the top European leagues. The Championship to a certain extent. The fact that the Premier League has come out and said we're not reducing fixtures, we're going to continue, we're not going to pause the season, we're going to carry on regardless of what's happening in the wider world, is interesting. There are calls by leading doctors for the season to have a stopgap suspension, like a winter break that has basically been taken out this season. I think what we saw with the NRL and the AFL, yes, they're in a different country. What we saw with the NHL, again, different country. They did say, well, we're not going to play, the NHL said, we're not going to finish this season, we're going to go straight to a playoff format. They rejigged it. They did it in 8 weeks, 10 weeks. They worked out from March to the resumption, I think, in August. They worked out a return to play protocol. Major League Baseball worked out a reduced schedule. Major League Rugby said that we don't have the financial TV deals and the finance behind us because we're a new league. We're going to just stop play. We'll come back next season. Gives our teams time to sort their finances out, prepare themselves, and we'll come back in March. They're coming back in 2 months' time. Major League Soccer had a round robin style tournament in Florida. They reorganised stuff. So yeah, football or soccer, if you're watching outside of North America, for example, we had an Australian MJ on earlier. Other leagues have shown more flexibility. I think European football is not showing the flexibility. This is the concern I have with completing the season as is. With what we've seen with these regular breaches of protocols by players, not just at Man City, but at Fulham, Crystal Palace, in the lockdown in the last season with a whole host of players at a whole host of clubs like Grealish misbehaving and Moses Keane. It does have a bearing on the image of the sport. And this is at the time when the sport was like, the debate about furloughing staff, player wage cuts, player wage deferrals. I think football hasn't been very flexible. They've got rid of their winter break, which will allow flexibility to play the postponed games. But rugby union has relegation as well in some leagues, such as the French top league, English league. Rugby league, they said no relegation this season. Just gone. They kicked out the Wolfpack. They brought in Lee Centurions. We can debate the pros and cons of that decision, where the clubs have the power over who gets to play in their league. I think that's a little bit tricky and can lead to issues because I think Toulouse and the Broncos, London Broncos, have a better right to be in the Super League. it's going to be interesting this coming Super League season because Catalan Dragons obviously are French based, and if there's any travel restrictions in place, whether they'll be able to play games, whether they'll have to be relocated to England in order to fulfil their fixtures, that'll be interesting. Look what's happened to the Warriors with New Zealand, and then being coming over to Australia to start their pre-season. They're not going to see their families till October, unless restrictions are eased and their families can be brought over. They're not going to be able to see their families. They're playing the entire season in Australia this year. That's 9 months. They're not going to see their families. It looks like that's a big sacrifice for these players to make. And we saw last season players leave the camp to go home, not because they didn't want to play rugby league or fulfil their contracts. They were like, "Well, my family can't come over. I can't see my family. My family life's more important than a sport," and they're allowed to go home. But it will be interesting to see what happens. I don't think the professional and non-leagues in the UK have especially given enough flexibility in order to fulfil fixtures. And if you look at, say, rugby in the post-season playoffs, but Premiership has relegation to the Championship. Same with Super League. There's a relegation promotion format. Yes, there's post-season play, but there's also a relegation format as well. But the Super League, obviously with no Championship and League One taking place, they made the correct decision to shorten the season because they had no choice, because 2 teams couldn't fulfil their fixtures, which put the integrity at the remaining, and 1 team didn't even resume play. So 3 teams were hammered, basically. Toronto couldn't resume play, and 2 other teams couldn't fulfil their fixture obligations. So the Super League had no choice. They had to act. In the end, it was done for the right reason. But I don't think there's enough flexibility in football to fulfil these postponed fixtures across the board. And with the amount of lower league clubs having games postponed, it could impact the FA Cup from the 3rd round onwards. It could massively impact the FA Cup, which would lead to a complete rejigging of the FA Cup draw, which will cause problems because the lower leagues are heavily dependent on the TV revenue, the sponsorships, the gate receipts, where there's no fans in attendance. But it is a situation. Please ask away, because I'm going to wind up the stream in a little bit. But ask a question. I don't think the FA and the professional leagues in England, at least, have allowed enough flexibility, and the same in Scotland, because this game's been postponed up there as well, to allow the flexibility to get all their fixtures completed. I really don't. Yes, they've taken out the FA Cup replays, but I'm not sure there's enough flexibility there in order to complete the season in its entirety without a suspension in play. Because there's still players breaching protocols, there's still positive tests. The lower leagues have been decimated. The FA Cup is 3rd round, where Championship and Premiership sides join the competition. The lower leagues, look how decimated they are with fixtures being postponed left, right, and centre. I cannot see there's enough flexibility in the football system, regardless of the promotion relegation argument, because we had this last season where points per game was used in order to complete the season. Financial. Resident speculator about increasing number of Super League clubs, expanding the Championship, dropping League One. Your thoughts? In order for that to happen, the TV deal would have to massively improve, and you would have to bring in the Scholars and the London Broncos. The Scholars would have to go into the Championship, and the Broncos would have to go back in the Super League. You could not do it solely in the north of England. There isn't the money there, and then that creates an interesting paradigm. Does the Championship become reserve grade, and does the Super League go like the NRL with no promotion relegation and the same teams are in there? It does raise an interesting question. The fact that the Ottawa Aces have deferred their entry into the Super League structure until 2022. They're only joining the season in League One. The Wolfpack, I think, don't play again. I don't see the Wolfpack playing again. I cannot see the Toronto Wolfpack playing again, which would then affect the Championship and League One season structures going forward. You could say they were officially relegated, and at least Centurions have been brought back up because they put forward a package out of all the teams that bid for the vacant Super League spot to fulfil that obligation. But I can't see the Toronto Wolfpack playing again, and I can't see the Ottawa Aces actually becoming a reality personally in next season. My thoughts on it. In that case, a lot of clubs are going to miss out. It doesn't necessarily solve a lot of the financial problems. The TV deal isn't good enough. They would have to argue for a brand new TV package. You would have to argue for more free-to-air coverage or a better TV package with Sky. I don't think Sky package is good enough, and I think there is enough fans out there for it to be free-to-air TV, which then would mean you would have to change the Challenge Cup format, and you would have to change the whole structure of the sport. Because in that case, you'd have two French teams in the Super League with Catalan and Toulouse, which would be I think, a benefit personally. But at the same time, if you're dropping League One and you expand the Championship, you would have to put Broncos in the Super League and you would have to put the Scholars in the Championship. For integrity's sake, to grow the game in the south of England. I think Coventry have a team as well, and that play in, I believe, League One. You would have to, give them a little bit. I don't know. I think that is a very interesting topic that you put forward. It's an interesting question. Absolutely. On the Chelsea result, I am surprised with that result, considering that Man City are missing six first team regulars. There is mounting pressure on Lampard. In seasons past, managers have been sacked for less. He's got the fifth worst win percentage of managers under the Abramovich ownership. Fifth worst. He's worse than Villas-Boas. I don't know. I feel so. I think Lampard is in a no-win situation because it doesn't matter if you bring success to Chelsea, you're getting sacked. Yeah, fuck it. I shouldn't really, but sod it. But the Chelsea Man City result is interesting. I don't think Werner is a bad player. I just think he's being played incorrectly by Lampard. But at the same time, the manager's the first one to get sacked. Always the first one to get sacked when players underperform or don't perform to their potential. I wouldn't say the German players are rubbish, but at the same time, when players are singled out, yes, they're professional sportsmen. They've got to cop some criticism in their performance, and these are professional athletes. They're not going to play well every game. It's very hard to be that consistent all the time. But at the same time, a lot of it lies with Lampard's tactics, and it also lies with recruitment. It lies with the recruitment and their youth policy. And Chelsea and Man City, for a certain extent, have been found out with their youth policies over the last decade, where they haven't brought through enough players into the starting lineups, and they have been exposed for that. And they were punished for their youth policies that were breaching rules. Man City and Chelsea, the two richest clubs in English with ownership, they're buying in mercenary players when they should be promoting players from their youth system. Chelsea's youth system has produced a lot of good players. I'm not going to kid myself. I'm going to, say that they haven't produced good players. Man City, for all the money they've invested in that supposed youth program, not enough players from their academy have made it into the main squad. So, and yes, Chelsea's defence was shambolic, was noted. From set plays and corners, they were not very good. And you could say Kepa in goal. He's been dropped. And I wouldn't say it's all Lampard's fault. I would also say, you got your scouts. You've got your scouts giving information to the manager. The manager obviously goes, right, okay. You've got your transfer budget. You've got players leaving. You've got players coming in. Yeah, I would say that the blame falls on the players, the manager, and the recruitment. I would say recruitment is a concern. And you could argue the tactics as well. So there's some blame on the manager, but the manager, puts out the team lineup. They practice in training. This is our plan for the game. This is the opposition they've made. This is what we know they're missing players. We can target them in this area and this area. They're starting goalkeepers out. Their back four hasn't necessarily settled. They're missing 6 key players, and the players underperform. These professionals, they should be very adaptable to a different manager. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm tuning out football more and more. There's the amount of negative headlines is one, but I am starting to fall out of love with a sport that I was, fanatical about as a kid and as a teenager. And yeah, when Chelsea enter the FA Cup in a couple of weeks in the third round, we may see more of their youth system getting put in. Some squad rotation. That's going to be very, very interesting how that all plays out. But I think with the Chelsea situation, Abramovich is known to have very little patience with managers. And you look at Lampard's points per game and win percentage, he's the fifth lowest in the Abramovich era. I think in the Premier League era as well. He's below Villas-Boas. That tells you something. There's no denying that fact. But at the same time, I think he's one of the few managers that has a good relationship with the owner from being a player. But the same argument was had with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer when he took over as well at Man United. He got a lot of criticism from the fans, but look where they are now. They're not winning well, they're winning ugly, but they're in the top three. I do think they need to give Lampard a bit of time. This is the problem with Chelsea. They don't give managers time. The average tenure, I think, is 9 months to 18 months. Now, then you have to go, right, did Frank Lampard have a big say on transfers? Or is that on scouting? Is that on ownership? There is a wider picture. We know they had their transfer embargo when he first took over. He did very, very well with not allowing to sign any players. Are they trying to catch up on players and catch up in the transfer market? It'll be very interesting to see what happens this month. It'll be interesting to see if they do fix that defence and if they offload any players. I don't think it's Werner's fault. I don't think it's Mason Mount's fault necessarily. Is it the system that's been employed? Lampard is an inexperienced manager in the sense that he had one season at Derby. I think he should have stayed at Derby a little bit longer, personally. That's my personal opinion. I think he should have learned his craft a little bit more in the Championship and maybe at another Premier League club before going to Chelsea. He's still in the top six. He's still got Chelsea being relevant. They're just not at the top of the table there, but they're still relevant, and that is important. That's the difference. They're still in the conversation for a European place. The FA Cup could be a springboard for Frank Lampard to go back to the final and win this season, considering where Arsenal are. So I don't think it's necessarily all doom and gloom. I think he does need to be given time to get his message across. I think that transfer ban is starting to have an impact, even though they're allowed to sign players now. I think they're playing catch up in the transfer market. But they have to look at their youth policy. They have to look at their scouting. Defence is a weakness, we know this. Their defence is a problem. Some of their signings haven't worked out, and they're on big money. And that's up to the player agent negotiating deals. This is where player agents need to be a little bit more scrutinised with their role in the game. Willian, he was good for Chelsea last season. He's gone to a different club with a different. But does he fit with Frank Lampard's future plans? Possibly not. At the same time, what is interesting to note is Solskjaer was under the same criticism last season and beginning of this season. He's managed to get this Man United team, while not playing well, to win games scrappily, which they were losing last season. He's made Man United relevant again. And there were calls for Solskjaer, another club legend at his club, when he was playing, to go. From the fan base online. Frank Lampard is going to face the same criticism. And maybe United do fall off, but they're relevant, they're in the conversation, and they're competing. And Solskjaer has got a lot more managerial experience than Lampard. And people go, we coached in the Norwegian League. It doesn't matter. It does. He won trophies in that league. It doesn't matter that it's a slightly lower level and slightly less intensity and it doesn't get the same press coverage across Europe. But he took a team in Molde that had been unsuccessful for 2 decades and wins them trophies and made them relevant again. that will serve him in good stead at Man United. Yes, the pressure is different because of the size of the club, but the difference is between Lampard and Solskjaer. Solskjaer's had a good decade of managerial experience. He did get, well, the Cardiff situation, I don't think it's on Solskjaer. I think that is actually on Cardiff not being a well-run club, personally. I think that's my personal opinion on Cardiff. It's not a well-run club. It's a yo-yo club. It's got bad ownership. That's my opinion on that. And that was his first toe in the water in the Premier League. But then you look at his time at Molde in Norway, and yes, you're operating with players who are on less money and it's less quality. It's a lower quality league, absolutely. I'm not disputing that Norway is the best league in the world. But he took a team that couldn't win, that had been irrelevant in the sense that they had had no success, barren period, and he got the trophies. And that got him the attention of Cardiff in the Premier League. That got him the attention of Man United in the Premier League because he turned a team around that hadn't been playing well. And he's a club legend at Molde as well, by the way. And it worked. His second spell, not so much, but it worked. He had a good relationship with the owner, a good relationship with the fan base. He turned that team around, made them relevant in that league again. And at Man United right now, he has faced a lot of crap. Bear in mind, the ownership there is not the best. I will say that about Man United. And the recruitment policy is a mess. But he's got to second with some players who shouldn't be in that squad. Pogba is a waste of space with the money he's got. But he's managed to turn things around. And he does have Sir Alex Ferguson for advice. Fergie still is actually actively involved with the club as an ambassador. He'd still phone him up and go, boss, what do I do? What advice can you give me? He's got that knowledge with Ferguson still having an active involvement with the club in a sense that Ferguson still follows the club, still has an active involvement with a lot of people at the club. He's got that phone line to his old boss going, give me some advice. Lampard at Chelsea, he is a favourite of Abramovich. They get on. That should give him time. I can see Lampard turning this around. I do think it does require the club structures to change, their recruitment policy to change, their scouting policy to change. And Lampard's still learning his craft as a manager. I don't think he's had enough time as a manager thus far. I think he should have stayed at Derby a bit longer. He possibly should have stayed in the Championship or coached a different side with less expectation to get that experience to then go to Chelsea. Or West Ham, because he was a West Ham favourite as well. Because he could be a good fit for West Ham. In my personal opinion, I think Lampard at West Ham would be a very, very good fit. Bayern going from 2-0 down to 5-2. Bayern have shown that they are human. I think Bayern Munich, I don't know how much longer they're going to dominate German football. I think that the gap is closing. I think the German league is great football to watch. I do question some of their policies on contracts and player retention, and that is on recruitment. And yes, Salah went to Roma, did really, really well, earned his transfer to Liverpool. He earned his move. Kevin De Bruyne earned his move to, I think he played in Germany for a bit, and then he goes on to Man City. Chelsea have made some real blunders when it comes to players. For whatever reason, they get moved on from Chelsea, go to other clubs, do really well, then move back to the Premier League and win trophies. That at Chelsea's expense. Even though Chelsea have won trophies in that time, some of their player recruitment and player and squad management decisions, I do scratch my head. Imagine having De Bruyne and Salah in that side right now. They don't lose 3-1 today. They don't. They probably win 3-1 today. That's the head scratcher, is some of the policies they've had. Now, whether that is Abramovich, whether that is some behind the scenes, where does the manager have full control of the transfer market and his transfers? I don't know. It's same with Man City and Chelsea. They've got the money in their academies. Chelsea have had more players come through their academy, absolutely. But you look at clubs like Southampton, and you look at clubs, around the Premier League and Championship. Crewe Alexandra, for Christ's sake, they're in like League Two. Some clubs have a brilliant youth policy. Southampton, I think, is the best example of a Premier League club. I think Liverpool and Everton are also up there. Newcastle back in the day, and they still got players coming through a weakened youth system at Newcastle. I remember Blackburn back in the day. We had quite a decent youth system. If it wasn't for Blackburn, you wouldn't have had Damien Duff. So there you go. If you are a Chelsea fan, but there are certain clubs in the Premier League and the Football League structure who've got really good youth systems with less money. Southampton, I think, is the best example. Liverpool and Everton, to a certain extent, but Southampton for me is the best example of a club that has a brilliant youth system and has done for decades. Matt Letizia is a prime example of a guy who came through the system at Southampton and played his entire career. Even though he was born in Jersey, he still obviously made his name at Southampton. And they operate. Southampton is a wealthy club, by the way. The ownership is very, very wealthy at Southampton. Let's not forget that. But they do have a very good youth system. I mean, Theo Walcott, you can argue Theo Walcott hasn't necessarily fulfilled his full potential as a player. He's gone back there. He's a club favourite there. They love him there. He hasn't necessarily achieved his full potential at Arsenal and Everton, but Walcott's a good player. He's not necessarily the player he should have been, but he's a Southampton product. He's gone back home. Ward-Prowse, another one. Letizia is obviously the most famous Southampton player who should have gone on to a bigger club, in theory, the bigger club. But no, he stuck it out Southampton at a time as Southampton were always on the edge of relegation battles. Mid-table was a good season. Southampton now are looking at Europe. Yeah, I think we know Huddersfield have closed their academy. That is a problem long term for the health of the game. The health of the game long term. These academies and youth systems that are just not viable for whatever reason. That is a worrying sign long term for the health of the game. It really is. And talking about academy players, if you do follow rugby league, Manchester United academy player who's now playing for the Brisbane Broncos in the NRL, Herbie Farnsworth. He was a Man United academy player, and then he switched to rugby league because, for whatever reason, rugby league seemed to offer him more opportunities to be a professional athlete. Apparently, according to all reports, Herbie Farnsworth could have played cricket as well. He's a very talented sportsman. He was also very good at school. Man United had him as an academy player, and he switched sports as a teenager, went into rugby league, and now is tearing it up in the NRL. And he's playing for the biggest club in the NRL, the Brisbane Broncos. Yes, the club had a bad season. He was one of their standout players. He's still a teenager. So football academies closing down and letting players go. A lot of them, could be picked up by other sports. And then you look at, Ricky Lambert. Okay, everyone mocks him for being a very one-dimensional player. He was a Liverpool academy product, told he would never make it. Did his hand in the non-league, ended up at Bristol Rovers, went to Southampton, goes back to Liverpool. Had a pretty good career, Ricky Lambert. Let's not kid ourselves. Ricky Lambert, underrated player. Grant Holt, ex-Norwich captain, ex-Nottingham Forest player. Again, told he would never make it as a player. Scored goals in the non-league and every professional league in England. Jamie Vardy. 3 players who've done it the hard way. Being told you're not good enough, you're not going to make it. And they've made it. But I know Huddersfield closed their academy a couple of years ago after they got relegated from the Premier League. It is a shame that lower league clubs. Herbie Farnsworth, George Williams, Dean Whitehead, he will be a cert for me. Josh Hodgson, if he can stay fit. Thompson, who's at the Canterbury Bulldogs. Got a couple other players coming over to the NRL this season. Herbie Farnsworth, I think, is a dark horse to make the World Cup squad. Keep your eyes peeled for him. He has played under Brisbane Broncos. He's got a high profile because he's playing at the Brisbane Broncos. You've also got, I can't remember if it's, I think it's George Burgess is still playing at the Rabbitohs. I think Tom came back to Super League. I think there's a couple others who are going to be going over to the NRL this season. But Herbie Farnsworth is definitely one as a young player who's coming through. He's the youngest out of the lot. George Williams has really taken to the Canberra Raiders in the halfback role. Brilliant season. But did better than the Australians were expecting, because normally when an English halfback or European halfback goes over to Australia, they don't quite make it. I think he settled in just fine. But all the English players are Canberra. But Herbie Farnsworth, I think, is the guy you want to keep your eyes peeled for. I think he can play fullback, he can play centre, he can play wing, either side. He can play on the right side, he can play on the left side, he can play fullback. He's definitely someone to keep your eyes peeled on. He's quick, athletic, great defensively, and he'll put 100. He will put a shift in every game. He's someone. He's still a raw talent, but he was one of the stand-up players for the Broncos this season in a really poor season. He really stood out. He didn't let his head drop. Keep your eyes peeled for Herbie Farnsworth. They're raving about him in Australia. He's a player to keep your eye on. I will be doing my preview on the Rugby League World Cup coming up. I've got to look how the group stage is structured, because it's got a weird group stage structure. Got Jamaica and Greece making their debuts. It's a more open World Cup this year than in previous years. So keep your eyes peeled on a video coming in the next coming days and weeks. I know we've got a while to wait, but I would keep your eyes peeled on the channel, because I will be doing a preview. I won't get the whiteboard out. I'll do it all by notebook. Just so for my own notes. The whiteboard, I haven't got the space, and the lighting in my flat at the moment isn't great. The IIHF World Championships, I'm not sure they're going to take place. I don't fully know what is going to happen with them. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Herbie Farnsworth used to be a Man United academy player. He was playing football, and he switched sports because he wasn't getting the opportunities at Man United, so he switched sports, I believe, when he was 16 or 17, and he went over to rugby league, and he's just been tearing it up. The Broncos love him. They're raving about him in the NRL and in the Australian media. He's a player to keep your eye out on. Because now with Kevin Walters as coach, I do think he's going to get played a lot. He's going to develop. And he's still young. And I can't see the Broncos giving up on him, because he was one of their few good players last year. And there's a lot of talent there. He's not the finished article, but he's very versatile, because he can play on either side. He can play left wing, he can play right wing, he can play right centre or left centre. He can even play fullback. He's got a good handling skills. He's got good energy. He's very good defensively as well. He reads the game very well. He's a rangy winger, a rangy centre. He's still filling out his body, but look to him to have a really big breakout season. I think last season, playing in a losing team, playing in a team that wasn't playing well, he didn't let his performances drop. He was constantly trying to score, trying to create, giving it a go. He would be a great asset to any NRL Super League side. Watch him do very, very well. I think he will definitely make the World Cup squad. I think he's a natural replacement for Makinson and Ryan Hall. And I think he worked very well with Jermaine McGilvery as the other winger, trucking the ball up. I think he could take a lot of the ball off Jermaine McGilvery and give Jermaine McGilvery more creativity space, where he'll just truck the ball up. He's very good defensively. He's over, I think he's 6'2", 6'3", so he's not a small man. He's quite a sizable young lad, and he's still filling out his body. So imagine him a couple of years' time when he's the finished article. I think he could play his whole career in the NRL. I really do. He's gone over there very, very young, and he's had a positive impact already. So, Herbie Farnsworth is definitely a player to keep your eye on this season if you follow the NRL. Definitely keep your eye on him. I think Kevin Walters is going to utilise him very, very effectively. He can play in the centres. And with Tony Staggs having his knee injury, I wouldn't be surprised, if he starts at right centre this coming season. But it'll be interesting. It is worrying that we've not heard anything about crowds. At the same time, it's 9 months away. The vaccine rollout starting, I think, by the time the World Cup comes around, I think vaccination and negative COVID tests to enter the country will be a thing. I think I wouldn't say it's best to postpone. I don't think the RFL can afford that. Hence why they got the emergency loan from the government. It is going to go ahead. I would think by the time the World Cup rolls around in October, we would have the vaccine rollout and the immunisation rollout. So look for crowds to be in there. It's fully broadcast on TV. I don't think the BBC can afford to it not taking place either because they bid for the sole rights. I'm looking forward to a really big tournament. I think 9 months is a long time. What we've seen from week to week, so much can happen in days. I mean, I was in a tier 2 area 2 weeks ago. I'm now in a tier 4 area. I went from tier 2 to tier 4 in 2 days. So a lot can happen in a very short space of time. But with now a second vaccine, the Oxford University AstraZeneca vaccine being rolled out as well as the Pfizer vaccine, I can see fans being in attendance in a very successful World Cup. But rugby union, I think, does have some issues. The debate is about we need to speed the game up, we need to free the game up. I think kicking needs, partly it's on the coaches as well. And this is where a player like Danny Cipriani, while he's left Gloucester and he's lost his love for the game and all that, if you have a fly half or an inside centre like Cipriani who will run the ball, you need to encourage players to run the ball. The style of rugby being played is very. You need players who aren't afraid to run the ball. You need players and coaches who are not afraid to be expansive. But it's a results game. But a lot of that comes from the club game as well. You need to have clubs that are willing, who are willing to be more expansive and more expressive with the ball in hand. Kicking's part of the game, but the way the rules are, it allows for too much of it. Rugby league obviously is designed to have less kicking, more running of the ball. And even then, you'll see a lot of tackle 6 run plays. There were a lot of players on the last tackle which are running. On the side of the Euros, UEFA are still going for a pan-continental tournament as things stand. Champions League and Europa League are still taking place as normal. So it will depend on what happens in the next, I'm going to say, 3 to 4 months. And it will depend on the domestic league completion. I would strongly agree with them going subscription in the World Cup here this year. I think the Rugby League World Cup, has a great opportunity to grow the game. And every game has been broadcast live on free-to-air TV, which is a massive thing. Sky have not got any of the games. It's all on BBC, which is a massive shot in the arm for Rugby League. But long-term, the TV deal with Sky needs to be resolved, and they need to sort out if they are going to, because there are rumours, as mentioned, that they are going to restructure the league structure and expand the Super League and expand the Championship, and rationalise things. But Rugby League needs this World Cup to be a success. But it is what it is. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there because I've got other things to do this evening. Thank you very much for all your questions. They've been great. The Chelsea Man City result does surprise me, but at the same time, Solskjaer was going through the same problems last season with Man United. He's still got a job. They're now second. Chelsea, they need to give managers time. But yes, on the last question, great opportunity for Rugby League. They need to get it right. They need to grow the game in the South. It'd be interesting, like the viewership figures in the South of England, if they could break it down by region, who watched where. Because yes, we've got the Broncos, we've got the Scholars. I think we need another team. We do need more teams in the South of England. There are fans in the South of England. There's a big Australian, New Zealand expat community in the South of England. There are fans here underutilised. But I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all your questions. I really appreciate them all. And I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.